Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to open the Swiss-Korean Life Science Symposium 2021 and welcome everyone joining us from Switzerland and Korea. Research and innovation are very important topics in both Switzerland and Korea. Both our countries invest a high percentage of their respective GDPs into R&D, and we are therefore amongst the most competitive and innovative countries in the world. It is therefore only natural that Switzerland and Korea seek to deepen their cooperation and intensify exchanges. Since 2008, Switzerland and Korea have a framework agreement on collaboration in science and technology, and this has already led to a significant intensification of bilateral cooperation between our countries. However, there remains significant potential to do more in order to increase collaboration between these two science and innovation powerhouses. People-to-people connections are a very efficient way to achieve this, and this is where the Life Science Initiative comes into play. Established in 2016 as a private-public partnership, the Swiss-Korean Life Science Initiative's main goal is to facilitate contacts and direct collaboration between Switzerland and Korea. The Life Science Symposium, which brings us together today, is the main instrument of the Life Science Initiative. Korea and Switzerland have complementary strength in biomedical and medical technology, and both countries are keen to reach out and share their strategies and success stories in innovation. The Swiss-Korean Life Science Symposium is a tailored instrument to create new networks between scientists, medical doctors, industry and startups from Switzerland and Korea. Through these networks, the participants aim to join forces to bring groundbreaking research to the market. The Canton of Basel, under the leading action of the University of Basel, has been a pioneer in cooperating with Korean universities, including entrepreneurship teaching and supporting startups with a network of experts. Basel-based companies like Roche and Novartis have identified cooperation with the international research sector and startup ecosystems as a driving motor for innovation. In this sense, Korea is a fertile ground thanks to the cutting-edge research in the medical field and vibrant startup ecosystem. Over the years, the Life Science Initiative brought us success stories. To mention just the latest, in 2020, the Korean company Green Cross MS invested in Hemotune AG, a spin-off from ETH Zurich founded in 2017. The Swiss company Debiopharm has concluded 2 collaboration agreements with Korean companies Genome & Company and Ubix Therapeutics in the fields of innovative cancer treatments. These are just some examples of how together Switzerland and Korea can drive innovation such as smart health, diagnostics, medical devices, personal medicine, and the development of new drugs. For the second consecutive year, the Life Science Symposium is happening online. The pandemic has unfortunately limited offline and in-person interaction, but it has definitely not prevented meaningful exchanges. This year, experts from Switzerland and Korea will meet and discuss the topic of healthcare in the post-pandemic era. In particular, experts from both countries will A. introduce advancement in assistive technologies for aging societies, B. share background conditions for cell and gene therapy, and C. bring new highlights and perspectives in digital health. Through the Swiss-Korean Life Science Symposium 2021, we look forward to bringing concrete results in the framework of bilateral cooperation. My thanks go to the organizers of today's event and their enduring commitment, notably the Korean Health Industry Development Institute and my esteemed colleagues at the Science and Technology Office of the Swiss Embassy. I would also like to thank the Korean Ministry of Health and Welfare, who as a sponsor, together with the State Secretariat for Education, Research and Innovation, have made today's event possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a successful symposium with numerous new partnerships and collaborations.
Good morning and evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Byung-Wook Choi, General Director of the Bureau of HT R&D Planning and Budget Management at KD. It is a great pleasure to meet you at Korea-Swiss Life Science Symposium, even it is a virtual event. First, I would like to express my deep gratitude to SERI and the Embassy of Switzerland in Korea here for welcoming and hosting us. And I also thank the University of Basel and the Dongguk University for collaborating with us to organize the event. Currently, we are facing several global issues, including prolonged COVID-19 pandemic, aging society, and incurable diseases. And countries in all over the world actively involved to innovative healthcare R&D and establish smart medical system converging IT technologies such as AI, cloud system, and deep learning. Also, for regenerative medicine, including cell and gene therapy, is rising and shows its growth potential as an alternative to treat incurable diseases. There are great demand of R&D in this field globally. It can be accomplished for this innovative R&D through active interactions and collaboration between researchers beyond the nations. Korea put more effort to respond to these global issues and to facilitate the suitable ecosystem for R&D innovation with various policies. Also, Korea has great growth potential in biomedical area with outstanding talents, analytical skills for data, high-tech medical equipment based on global level of ICT and medical infrastructure. Switzerland ranked in first country in the world in Global Innovation Index by World Intellectual Property Organization in 2021. Also, it is a leading country for biopharmaceutical industry in the world, having global companies such as Novartis and Roche. At the same time, Switzerland has established R&D innovation by supporting open innovative relationships between R&D institutes and global companies. So it is greatly meaningful to have this joint event between these two countries which have their own strengths and wares in healthcare industry. I believe it is a good opportunity to exchange their innovative ideas for academia, institutes, and startups from Korea and Switzerland, and cement their relationship and find practical ways for collaboration with each other. I hope this will be a springboard to promote substantive cooperation between both countries in biomedical area. KIDI will intensify global R&D network with constant interactions with the Switzerland healthcare experts here today and support active relationship between domestic researchers and researchers in overseas. Once again, I sincerely thank to all experts and researchers from diverse sectors in Korea and Switzerland for attending the event. And I wish you all can grasp the insights and find the opportunities for R&D collaboration. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Life Science Symposium 2021. I'm Alessandra Picella, in charge of the Science and Technology Office of the Embassy of Switzerland in Seoul. Together with the Korean Health Industry Development Institute, we organize every year the Life Science Symposium as a moment of exchange between the two countries in the healthcare field. This year's event will include 3 parallel sessions. Session number 1 on assistive technologies for aging society will be moderated by Amy Wilson, CEO of Clever Care, a Swiss-based digital health startup providing a coordination tool for caregivers of older people. In her previous role at the Global Centre of Modern Aging, based in Australia, Amy worked on autonomous vehicles, tech-enabled assistive care devices, and telemedicine to identify market opportunities and co-develop new innovations to meet the needs of the aging demographic. Session number 2 on cell and gene therapy will be moderated by Orlando Scherer, Associate Director of the IBS Center for Genomic Integrity and Distinguished Professor at UNIST. He previously held faculty positions at the University of Zurich and Stony Brook University. His research combines chemical and biological approaches to study DNA damage, DNA repair, and DNA damage signaling pathways and their relationship to carcinogenesis and anti-tumor therapy. Session number 3 on digital health will be moderated by Mario Garcia Lee, CEO of Lighting Up Ventures. He is an educator, scientist, and entrepreneur who specializes in the intersection between innovation and commercialization. Gaining an interest in how advanced technologies could improve everyday life, Mario was sponsored by South Korea's Ministry of Strategy and Finance to assess support systems for innovation-driven enterprises. To assure a smooth development of the event, I'd like to share some simple instruction. It is the first time for us to use a Hopin platform, so please be patient. Following this intro, we will move to the sessions. A message will soon appear on the screen to invite you to move. Please click on the session icon on the left of your screen and join your preferred session. You're also free to move among sessions by going back to the reception and then clicking again on sessions. Only speakers and moderators' video and mic will be active in the sessions. Please remark that in each session, one staff will be also acting as moderator for the logistics. Please use the session chat and Q&A to ask questions or share comments. The moderator will take care of them. You can also have a one-to-one interaction with the participants in the chat. At the end of the panel discussion, you will be invited to move back here to the stage for the closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the organizers, I wish you good listening and exchange.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Wilson, CEO of a Swiss-based startup, Clevercare. It's with pleasure today that I'm joining you all to facilitate this session on assistive technologies for an aging society. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the fragility of the health and social care systems worldwide, particularly for marginalised groups such as individuals with disabilities and older people, including those who are living in long-term care facilities. COVID-19 has revealed that home-based wellness and healthcare programs, in particular rehabilitative and assistive care, have the potential to decrease the costs and make effective interventions more accessible for all. In addition, from physically assistive robots to companion robots, people's expectations are changing, and with that, so is their willingness to engage in new modes of therapy and living, in particular those which are digitally enabled. The speakers and panel discussion will explore the following questions. What is the current status of technology and regulation leading to the assistive technology for aging societies? What are the developments and revitalisation strategies for senior-friendly high-tech medical devices in both countries? And is there an open innovation plan for companies in the field of senior-friendly high-tech medical devices? It's with pleasure that I introduce the speakers and panel members for the session today. We have Olivia Lambercy, who is a senior scientist and the ad interim director of the Rehabilitation Engineering Lab at ETH Zurich. We have Dr. Sang-Hoon Lee, director of the R&D Center at Curexo, a Korean medical robot company, and Professor Jae-Sun Choi from Asun Medical Center. Thank you for joining us today. I'm confident that it will be both insightful and an inspiring session for everyone. So we'll now hear from two of our speakers who will both have 15 minutes each to share with us some of their insights, followed by a panel discussion at the end. So first of all, I would like to welcome Dr. Sang-Hoon Lee, who will be presenting on experiences of developing a gait training robot towards the aging society. Over to you now.
Okay, thank you for your kind introduction. It's my pleasure to share our experience with you about the technology we developed for the elderly people. In my talk, I introduce morning work, innovative gait training robot, and I shortly tell you a small lesson we got from development of patient transfer robot, CarryBot. Corexo is a medical robot company. We developed 3 kinds of medical robots, 2 surgical robots for bone surgery, joint surgery, and spine surgery. And last one is gait training robot for rehabilitation, the morning work. And 3 robots actively used in clinical situation in many hospitals. Independent working is a key factor of quality of life for patient or elderly people. But providing safe and effective gait training is quite difficult, because usually it's because of the fear of falling. But by using robotic technology, you can provide safe and effective training to the patient. And you can provide highly intensive and patient-specific training to the patient. And there are many kinds of gait training robots, exoskeleton robots, or end-effector time robots, stationary robots, or mobile robots. You can also categorize by the level of body weight support or an assistance of the patient intention. Our morning work is a robot which providing safe body weight support and various work experience to the patients. Morning work has unique mechanism, end effector and saddle. Each foot plate is an end effector of a robotic manipulator, and the end effector generate the gait trajectory for the patient, and the saddle supports the body weight of the patient. And because of this unique mechanism, preparation time becomes very short, usually just 1 or 2 minutes to prepare the training. And this is the second generation of morning work. It's 2.5 meters long. It's a half of the first generation robot. As I told you, the morning work provides gait pattern by using foot plate, which is actually 3 degrees of freedom robotic manipulator. Because of that, we can provide various gait patterns: ground working, slope working, stair working. And by using many kind of sensors and VR software, we can provide various biofeedback to the patient, and many kind of the active assist functions for the patient to engage the patient into their training. As I told you, morning work provide gait pattern through the foot plates and support body weight by saddle. It provides various biofeedback using sensor technologies. And the children's training is possible just by simple changing the foot binding and saddle. And morning work provides plenty of training reports to analyze the progress. Morning work offers various training modes to engage the patient into their training and accelerate their recovery. For example, many work patterns and actively changing trajectory and speed, and the selective motion training for gait phases. I show you some technological issue while developing the morning work. This is the gait trajectories of Andy effector. We made the gait trajectory by using the trajectory of the foot plate while the patient moves. It shows the ground working and stair working. And for the saddle, body weight, saddle type body weight, we tested by using some kind of special equipment for gait training. So by using this test, we confirmed that the saddle can be used to our system. And actually, the saddle has good effect for the gait training. For example, while people works, the upper body moves just like the inverted pendulum. The saddle can realize that kind of motion, but overhead harness case, it is quite difficult to make that kind of motion. It's because pendulum motion. And since the first installation of morning work in 2015, now 19 hospitals use in Korea. 3 of that are the second generation one. We are now preparing enter into the overseas market. And thanks to the active clinical researches of our users, we've got clinical evidences on stroke, spinal cord injury, brain tumor, or even for the musculoskeletal disease such as TKA. And about our stroke result, our result was included recently updated Cochrane review, which is a high quality analysis about the clinical effectiveness. You can see a big improvement of gait speed compared to other studies. Also, morning work get high satisfaction points from the patients. Recently, we've got another very valuable clinical evidence about the mechanism of recovery. It shows morning work training activates the motor reason of the patient brain, and it brings the recovery of working ability of the patient. This evidence is consistent with the theory of neuroplasticity. This is the first week training for the stroke patient. And right shows the third week of the training of the same patient. You can see quite improved working and very symmetric and stable movement of the body weight shift motion. We saw a possibility of morning work for the elderly people care who can work well. We tested the geriatric hospital, and we got a great improvement of depression index, for the elderly patients who got the stroke a long time ago and stay more than 1 year. For many reasons, it is too difficult to provide working experience to the patient who have to lie in the bed most of the day. We saw the hope by using the robotic technology, we can provide some kind of improvement of the elderly people's quality of life. The patients at the geriatric hospital really enjoyed the morning work training. The training time was 30 minutes a day, but at the end of each session, patient would not get off the robot. One thing we feel sorry about the hospital is that their budget was not enough to maintain morning work, so we could not keep the test. And this may tell the current situation of elderly care. Let me talk about a short story we experience with care robots. There are many kinds of care robots for everyday life of the elderly people, and many robotic solutions have been developed till now. And several years ago, we developed a patient transfer robot, CarryBot. The robot designed to help caregivers to move the patient from bed to wheelchair or the toilet seat. We thought it was so intuitive because it adopts the piggyback concept, and it was comfortable and safe. And we did field test in several hospitals. Many people excited about the concept of piggyback. Through the field test, we got many feedback, pros and cons from the users, and made the second generation of CarryBot. And we did the field test again, but we could not make it to the commercialized product. We got a lesson from the case. We may solve the pain point of the caregivers, but we may have added new ones, new pain points. Actually, we are not the only one. The patient transfer mission is not solved till now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that overview. Those two really interesting pieces of technology. I would like to invite, we do have a couple of minutes. If anybody has any questions, you can write it in the Q&A chat and I can ask them from Dr. Lee. But while you're all thinking about any questions that you have, I'm curious to know, what are your next steps for the two technologies? Do you have any plans for the short to medium term into what's next for them?
For the morning work, well, we are planning to make next generation for the healthcare, because the gait training robot, the morning work now is kind of expensive equipment, usually for the subacute stage patient. So we are thinking about the less expensive version, which can be installed in, for example, the care home or the kind of institutions.
Great. Thank you. Brilliant. Well, we'll now move on. Thank you so much for that. And if you have any other questions that come up, then we'll have some time in the moderation session to ask those as well. So please keep them in mind, but feel free to post in the Q&A chat. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee.
Thank you.
So now I would like to welcome Dr. Olivier Lambercy to present to us Towards a Technology-Supported Continuum of Care, Approaches for Minimally Supervised Rehabilitation of Hand Function. Over to you, Dr. Lambercy.
Thank you very much. If I can share my screen. Can you see my screen, my slides? Or?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes, we can. All right, very good. So thank you very much for the kind introduction. And apologies for me being late. Had some minor technical difficulties to log in. But thank you very much for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to present and discuss our research. In particular, today, I will talk about how technology could help improve the continuum of care for the rehabilitation of patients after neurological injuries. And I'll try to illustrate that through our work on minimally supervised rehabilitation of hand function. Maybe let me start by telling you a few words about our research laboratory, so a rehabilitation engineering lab at ETH Zurich. So in our group, we are interested in the development of novel engineering approach, in particular robotics and sensor technologies that we apply to the field of neuroscience and clinical research to provide new tools that can help answer both basic science questions as well as clinical questions. And primarily our research focuses on three pillars. So exploring human sensory motor control and how we learn to perform movements. So that for that we use this tool that span from wearable robotics, neuroimaging, and MR compatible robots, and so on. The second aspect is to develop new assessment methods to evaluate sensory motor function and impairment in neurological patients. And that can be based on simple accelerometry or dedicated robotic platform for assessing functional ability. And finally, we also want to bring to the patient and also clinically evaluate novel rehabilitative technologies to try to restore sensory motor function and positively impact the quality of life and independence of these patients. So primarily, we've heard a little bit about that before already. Primarily, we work with patients after neurological injuries, such as stroke or spinal cord injury. So as probably most of you know, stroke is the leading cause of adult long-term disability. It affects about 15 million people worldwide, and about 80% of stroke survivors suffer from upper limb motor deficits, which strongly affect their activities of daily living. You have an example here on this video of such a person, even 3 years after his stroke, where you can clearly see some remaining impairment in the way he's performing this task involving the arm and the hand. So you see muscle weakness, you see abnormal muscle synergies that leads to this suboptimal wrist position, inability to open the hand or coordinate arm and hand movement. We know as well that somatosensory deficits are present in these patients, which there's also increasing evidence of the negative impact this has on functional recovery. So overall, hand function is often affected in patients after stroke, and when you think of everything we do every day with our hands, it's clear that this has a strong negative impact on the independence and quality of life of patients after stroke. So rehabilitation is in the form of physical and occupational therapy is the treatment of choice after a stroke, but stroke rehabilitation faces as well many challenges. So first, there's an important socioeconomic pressure on healthcare system. So there's an increase in the aging population and also a lack of resources in the terms of number of therapists that are available for patients. And it's also been shown through the exceptional COVID-19 pandemic that healthcare systems are fragile and that the current delivery mode of rehabilitation which focuses largely on hospital stay and one-to-one physical therapy with the clinician, is of course strongly affected by the additional rules that COVID created. And as such, rehabilitation has been shown to be kind of left over in the current delivery of care. Also, rehabilitation itself is expensive. There's a pressure to decrease the duration of hospital stays. And as a result of that, there is a general agreement that the dose of therapy that patients receive over the course of their recovery is not sufficient. And there's also now a growing number of studies that actually show that if you would give higher doses, patients would actually recover better. And one reason for the limited dose is also the rather scattered so-called continuum of care. So when patients are in the hospital or even attending outpatient clinics, there's a lot of possibilities and a lot of therapy, very intense therapies. But once they are back at their home, there is little to no solutions to support quality therapy and really motivate patients to engage in rehabilitation. And also, we still have a limited understanding of some of the mechanisms after stroke of recovery and what rehabilitation parameters can best influence these. So how to improve that? So we see a need to revise stroke rehabilitation and to develop models, novel technologies for better understanding stroke rehabilitation and try to make it more effective. So achieving higher recovery gains with having to rely less on one-to-one treatment and hospital stays. So the idea is to move through the use of technology from a model that is hospital-centered to a model that is more home-centered. So when you look at this representation here of the current model of care after stroke, you have patients that have an intensive inpatient rehab phase where the therapy dose is high, supported by various technologies, such as the one we've seen in the previous talk, for example. But these devices usually are rather complex and they are limited to use in the hospital. And after discharge, the patient may visit hospital a few more times periodically, but when they are at home or outside therapy, outside of supervised therapy session, there's little support and motivation to engage in therapy. Now, what we hope to do is to provide a set of simple complementary technologies, which are kind of represented by these blue icons there, that could enable minimally supervised therapy. And we define that as therapy that can happen either independently by the patient or under very minimal supervision from therapists. And this could provide a way to increase the dose, first in the clinic, but also when the patient are discharged at home, if they could take these devices along and train independently in their home environment. So for this purpose, we see key enablers to allow that vision. And as I said, we need to have a set of complementary and rather simple, easy to use technologies, which can be exchanged based on the need of the patient. We need to embed some intelligence in those technologies so that the technology can make sense of the data that they can collect with patients, so that, for example, therapy parameters such as the difficulty or type of exercises can be adjusted, but also provide therapists with remote information to provide some kind of daily monitoring of performance and also track the progress of patients. And finally, again, through the data that are collected during just simple use of technology, you can gather rich and multimodal data that can help you better describe stroke recovery and the impact of different types of intervention. So this is just an overview of what we are currently trying to implement in the Future Health and Technologies program, which is a program that takes place at the ETH Singapore ETH Center. And it's a large collaborative program between ETH Zurich and Singapore universities and hospitals. So if you want more details on that, please feel free to visit the website. In the rest of this talk, I'll present you an example of how to implement the vision I've just shared. And I will present you some more details of some of the studies we did in this direction, where we focus here on hand rehabilitation with a simple hand effector as well, a robotic device that we call the rehaptic knob, as you can see on this picture. It's a relatively simple robotic tool that was specifically designed to train two basic tasks, so grasping, so hand opening and closing, with linear movement of this two-finger support, and the second degree of freedom, which is pronation supination of the forearm, with the robot rotating along its main axis. And one of our hypotheses was that by training the hand is so essential in activities of daily living. By training the hand, we hope to have a beneficial effect on the entire arm. Okay, so using this robotic platform, we collaborated with a clinic in the south of Switzerland, where we implemented a robot-assisted neurocognitive therapy. So what does that mean? So we based this on the concept developed by Perfetti, where the idea is to train together motor function, sensory function, as well as the cognitive processes that are linking the two in the context of hand exercises. And if you think about our hands, we perceive the environment and sensory information through our hands, so it seems to make sense to not neglect the sensory component and train motor, sensory, and cognitive processes together. In clinic, such exercises typically consist of cognitive tasks where you have to identify the size of different sticks, as you can see on this picture, or the stiffness of different objects where you have to rely on information coming from your hand, so no visual feedback. Now, a robotic device such as the one we have is ideal to train this type of interaction with objects, as virtually any mechanical properties can be easily rendered. So from moving freely to resistive, very stiff and resistive object, virtual objects. So you see on this video some examples of these neurocognitive exercises that we implemented on the rehaptic knob. In this case here, it's a stiffness discrimination exercise where the patient has to interact with virtual objects such as sponges and try to identify specific object properties or that they are probing. So again, you have an active hand movement generated by the patient, have to rely on sensory information obtained from the hand in order to make a cognitive decision. Okay, so we investigated this concept in a randomized controlled trial with the following objective. So we wanted to demonstrate that neurocognitive robot-assisted therapy can be successfully integrated in the daily rehabilitation program of patients in the clinic. We wanted to show that it's non-inferior to dose-matched conventional therapy in terms of upper limb impairment reduction. So we really try to match exactly the number of sessions and number of movements between our two groups and see that we don't have any negative effect when using the robot. And we wanted to also see how feasible, motivating, and accepted it can be by patients. So we perform a randomized control trial. So we had two groups, one group receiving conventional therapy only, and one interventional group where once a day per week, one session was replaced by robot-assisted therapy. So it lasted for 4 weeks, training 4 days per week for a total of 15 sessions. And as I said, we try to really carefully match the dose in terms of number of movement patients were doing either with the robot or during conventional therapy. And note as well as in this study, we included subacute patients, so that were receiving therapy in the clinic, that they were rather mildly impaired with the Fugl-Meyer score of around 50. Fugl-Meyer is probably the gold the standard in terms of evaluating upper limb impairment. It's a scale between 0 and 66. And that also was our primary outcome measure at the end of the 4 week of intervention. So in terms of the clinical outcomes, our equivalence analysis confirmed that robot-assistive therapy, neurocognitive therapy, is non-inferior to dose-matched conventional therapy. So you can see from the plot up there, showing the change on our main outcome measure, the Fugl-Meyer score in both groups. We had significant decrease in upper limb impairment with both over 6.5 points increase, even with a slight advantage for the interventional group. And very importantly, these changes were maintained up to 6 months after the study. Very interestingly as well, we could see that upper limb improvements were both seen distally and proximally, which supports our initial hypothesis that if you train with a robot that only acts at the level of the hand, you can still have a beneficial effect for the entire arm. Also, interestingly, improvement in hand function and somatosensory function were observed. So we could conclude that hand robot-assisted therapy leads to an equivalent reduction in upper limb impairment in comparison to dose-matched conventional neurocognitive therapy with patient. So what do we learn from this? So that means we can substitute a conventional therapy session by a session with the robot without negatively affecting the overall outcome of the therapy program. And this is now an essential and necessary step before we can propose robot-assisted therapy as a complement to conventional care or as an addition. And one way to propose this is the potential, with the potential to further increase the dose, is through minimally supervised therapy. So having patients interact with the robot without requiring the constant presence of the supervising therapist. Why doing that? Why is it interesting? Well, if it's feasible and acceptable, it could help increase the dose as therapy becomes now independent from the schedule of the therapist or from the schedule of the hospital. Can help decrease the burden on the healthcare system as there's no need to rely on the constant presence of the therapist. And it also paves the way for independent use outside of the hospital, for example, directly in the home of patients. But of course, minimally supervised use of a robotic device is challenging at multiple levels, right? So on this picture here, you see the current setup of our RehabTechnom robot during a supervised therapy session. And clearly the therapist plays an important role in this, similar to most existing rehabilitation robots. Before a session, the therapist defines a therapy plan, which exercise will be performed, some parameters of the exercise. And during the session, the therapist logs on the system, starts the therapy program, sometimes with a not so user-friendly user interface. It guides the user, help if needed, and of course monitors what's happening. And after a session, the therapist also has to save the data, log out, and review the therapy plan for the next session. Now, in order to implement this vision of minimally supervised scenario, we want to keep the therapy planning in the hands of the therapist. The idea would be to shift all the other tasks to the patient or to the robot itself. So for this purpose, we set ourselves the task to entirely revisit the environment of our robot and add, for example, a fingerprint reader to directly log in when patient arrive to the robot. We also have now a physical button interface so that we can navigate through the user interface, select objects, select games. So everything can be done now by the patient through this push button interface. We try to also take best advantage of the measurement the robot can do so that we can have an automatic algorithm that can adapt the difficulty of exercises based on patient progress, and also that the parameters can be automatically saved to a database and directly provide reports to the therapist. Okay, so that's nice, but was this feasible and usable? So to try to investigate that, we did a pilot study, where we wanted to evaluate feasibility and usability, and also test therapy exercise that were a little bit more motivating for patients. So we recruited 10 chronic patients with a mean Fugl-Meyer score of 41.5, so moderate upper limb impairment, and they came to the lab for a single therapy session. And the idea was to first show them the exercises, let them perform the exercise under supervision, and then immediately afterwards have the therapist step away and let the patient use the robot independently without intervening. And our main outcome there was a usability of the overall system. And the results were quite interesting, with all 10 patients being able to use the robot upon first exposure. Usability results were rather good, with patient rating the user interface and the robot between good to excellent and the game between okay to excellent. And the workload of using the system without supervision was perceived as acceptable. The therapist only had to intervene for very minor clarification on 3 out of 26 tasks that the patient were required to do when using the robot. There was also no adverse event. So this pilot study was quite promising, but of course it also highlighted the need for a training phase, and that for a proper transition to minimally supervised therapy, user would likely benefit from longer training phase of supervised use. So we are currently now in the process of implementing that in a study performed in the clinic. So again, over 4 weeks, and we really split this 4 week of therapy into a supervised phase in the first week, where patients learn to use the robot, a semi-supervised therapy phase for the second week, where the therapist is still there but not intervening, and then in the last 2 weeks, completely minimally supervised therapy, where the patients are asked to go to the robot by themselves if they want to, and use it as much as they want. For example, in the evening, during lunch break, on the weekend, and so on, without any supervision. So in this setup, therapy is not enforced, but we really want to test the willingness to engage in a minimally supervised setup, and whether this could be a solution to increase the dose. As I said, the study is ongoing. So far, we had 5 patients, and you see an example here of one of the patients operating the robot independently during a minimally supervised therapy session. So far, attendance to pre-programmed session is quite good, with more than 75% of minimally supervised session attended or at least started by the patient. And when actual dose, we could see, when we look at number of movement or the time spent training the hand, we can see that we can increase by 46% the actual dose of exercises focusing on the hand. So these results confirm that with a suitable environment, minimally supervised therapy with an active device is possible, well accepted, and seems to increase the dose in specific patients. And the logical next step is to move towards the home. Of course, it creates additional challenges. You need to redesign the system to make it a bit more scalable, more portable, and also embed this clinical intelligence for monitoring and decision making. And also clearly this needs to be seen in a broader context, since there is no one device or one solution that can fit all patients. So you need a more holistic approach, and this could take the form, as mentioned before, of a set of simple devices that are compatible, connected, and gather data together, that could first be used and trained in the clinic, and then the patient could selectively take home to continue therapy when discharged from the hospital. Okay, to conclude, therapy and assistant technologies should be seen as novel tools to complement existing rehabilitation approaches. Robots don't need to be complex. We could see that digital training has benefits. It can be seen as equivalent to those much conventional therapy. And robots also have the advantage to provide continuous data and be able to provide assessment. We've demonstrated first step towards minimally supervised use of such tools. It's feasible and acceptable within the clinic. It clearly should not be seen as a way to replace the therapist, but to provide complementary solution and support this continuum of care. We have promising results, but clearly this is not feasible for all patients. And there are certainly challenges remaining. I guess we'll touch upon some of that later in the discussion. So how to ensure access to these technologies. There are a lot of ethical questions related to how data is generated and collected remotely. Of course, costs and how these systems can be reimbursed is also a big question. And with this, I reach the end of my talk. I thank all the people supporting this research. I thank you for your attention. I apologize for being slightly late with the schedule. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Lambercy. It was 2 very interesting technologies and very encouraging to see you acknowledge that the supervision, a high degree of supervision, can be a bit of a barrier. And so then finding ways to evolve the technology to enable that greater level of independence. So thank you for such wonderful examples of enabling independent independence for people in their care. So I'd like to thank Dr. Lambercy and Dr. Lee for their presentations today and sharing with us some really interesting case studies around different technologies in assistive care. We'd now like to invite Professor Jae-Soon Choi to join the speakers for our panel discussion. So if we could get all of the panel with your videos on, thank you. So we have a few questions that we're going to talk through, but we do invite the viewers to ask any questions that they have as well. You just post them to the right-hand side. There's a chat function, but then there's a Q&A. So if you post a question in there, then we can get through some of those as well. So first of all, I think a big topic that comes up when we talk about technologies, and especially in healthcare, is the topic of trust. Who has responsibility for building this consumer trust in these new technologies, and how can we best create that trust or instill trust in the users of these technologies? So that's including both patients as well as therapists and healthcare professionals. Dr. Lambercy, I'll pass over to you first. I think this flows on well from what you were just presenting.
Yes, of course. That's definitely a very important question. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, I mean, the development of assistive and rehabilitative technologies, in my opinion, involves multiple stakeholders, right? So we have technology developers, we have designers, we have caregivers, we have the patients as well, right? And they all play a very important role in how we help building trust in technology. I think it's the responsibility of everyone involved in the development of such tools to help build trust in this. And in that sense, I feel one aspect that is extremely important is to involve all the stakeholders in the development. So really, talking about user-centered design here, which I think is really key for this type of technology. So involving users, all the stakeholders, in not just in the initial idea and later on in evaluation. In our research, because getting direct feedback from users to help better understand their needs and whether we meet those needs is really fundamental.
I think that's a great point. It's really about taking them on the journey. It's not just about speaking with them at certain touch points, but then being a part of that whole journey of the research and development and testing of a solution.
Yes, because technology developers, they like to develop tools. That's what we do. I'm an engineer. I like to develop gadgets, but if it's to figure out that at the end patients say there's no use of that, then that's not good. Exactly. We need to really have their opinion from the beginning.
Most definitely. And Dr. Lee, have you got any thoughts to share regarding building trust in technologies?
Yeah, basically I agree with Dr. Lambercy, and I saw some situation in clinical cases of rehab robots. Sometimes the patient, the old age patient, feel fear about the robot itself. So of course, I think the person who developed the technology must build the trust. But at the same time, all the adapters who are willing to experience the new technology essential. With the early adopters, we need to get key feedback and should make a meaningful improvement from the feedback. And this is a critical procedure for especially for the building the trust to the new technology. And I think pandemic made people's mind open to new technologies. It is a very positive situation to speeding up the expansion of new robotic technologies in elderly care system. Okay.
Yeah, I think definitely that's a common topic that people talk about, that they're a bit of a silver lining from COVID. One of the few is that receptivity and adoption of technology has really been fast-tracked through this time. Great, thank you. And I think so trust is one barrier, but there are also other things that can prevent the adoption and receptivity to new technologies. Professor Choi, would like if you could share with us from your experiences, how do these concerns or this receptivity and adoption of these technologies vary across the different stakeholders? So you've got health professionals, patients, family members. What are some of the barriers and what's being done to overcome these?
Yeah, I think it's by their focus or what's meaningful or important for them to decide how they will receive or adopt the technologies. And very diverse perspectives exist, I think. Healthcare professionals usually have more focus on the efficacy or clinical outcome, whether it is medical device or assistive tools we talked about today. So, and also patients too consider the efficacy, but they have more considerations such as cost effectiveness and usability, especially in the case of the senior citizens, senior people. And also, depending on varying their economical and social status and disease status and disability status, one may have a very different receptivity to specific technology compared to the others, even among the patients. And also, family members too have similar factors in the receptivity, I think, as the patients. And the healthcare professionals seem to show more conservative attitudes, as you well know, to the technologies than patients and families. And these days, due to the advancement of various IT technology and abrupt changes in our lifestyles, patients seem to have more open to utilization of new technologies, at least in Korea, as I can see. And regarding how to overcome, we can think of solutions or answers to each factors affecting this receptivity of stakeholders. I think the solution can be provided by largely three sectors. The first one is society. I believe society should and could come up with the cost reimbursement solution to resolve or lessen the burden of the cost for adopting the technologies. It could be by medical insurance system or any other fund, grant, support program, and so on. So technologies usually causes some additional or increased cost, especially in the early stage. So it is not right or maybe burdensome for the patients or families to absorb the cost by themselves. And secondly, a second answer could come from, I think, the engineering research. So as Dr. Lambert's approach and research, they could and should research and develop not only efficient tools, but also with the tools with reasonable cost. So affordable device, I mean. So both the technology itself with good efficacy and usability and the reasonable cost should be pursued at the same time. And a third provider could be clinical research. So anyway, this is for some medical outcome, clinical outcomes. So continued research for improved, proven efficacy should be done. Then they could help the stakeholders for better receptivity or adaptation of this new technology.
Great, thank you, Professor Choi. I think that's a great overview for each of the different stakeholder groups. Dr. Lambercy, can you provide an example perhaps of where you've seen this difference in receptivity and adoption across stakeholder groups from some of the work that you've done?
Yeah, so when it comes to reception and adoption, I mean, this can really vary a lot, I think, between different subjects, right? It's really personal, right? And yes, some patients are not receptive to some technology, but for me, it always comes back to what kind of benefits do they get from using a technology, I think, versus how much effort it takes for them to use it, right? It's always, for example, a good example of that would be powered prostheses, right? They are really nice solutions with upper limb prostheses that have all kinds of dexterous movements. But if they are too complicated to use versus the amount of benefit for daily life tasks that they provide to the subject, then this leads to rejection. And you see that many prosthesis users eventually end up using simple cosmetic glove because, well, it doesn't really matter. They still have another hand that they're happy to use, and they just don't want to look like cyborg in public. This mentality may change a little bit now, but I mean that was one of the one good example in a way to see that it doesn't have to be, if it's too complex and doesn't provide sufficient benefit, then to me it's key to technology rejection. So I think we need to try to better understand the needs of the patient and really tailor solutions to meet these needs, and these solutions should be simple and simple to use, I think. And then the second aspect, I think, is managing expectations, and that goes for patients and also for healthcare professionals, right? Technology, robotic devices, they're not magic machines, right? They cannot solve all the problems. So it's important that everybody understands what technology brings, what it should be used for, but also its limitation and how it should complement the workflow of clinicians or act on a specific aspect of daily life for patient. And that's this communication about limitations and expectations should help also build trust, coming back to the point we were saying better. And that should be a way for me to ensure interest and willingness to use.
Yeah, thank you. I think another interesting point which Professor Choi brought up was around the cost as well. And so I think that's a challenge that we have moving forwards. And too, does anyone have any additional comments regarding making technology affordable and accessible to patients and or to hospitals and other care providers that need to make these solutions available?
I can go if you want. Cost is always an awful topic, of course, because again, there I believe we have to be pragmatic and focus on simpler solutions that solve a specific problem. And if you have simpler solutions, you can hopefully try to go down to get the cost down, right? Again, most patients have a specific goal. They want to regain something or their specific problem. It's not necessarily necessary to have a complicated robot, a complicated machine that can train any movement if at the end of the day you use it for only a specific one for patient, right? And clearly, if you really want to have devices that go to the home of patients where they can train, well, clearly we need to reduce the cost, or we need to have cost model that allow us to, for example, rent a device from a hospital. We need to have insurance companies on board that they can reimburse this type of treatment, and for that we need also to demonstrate efficacy. So it's a multifaceted problem, I think.
Oh, most definitely. And trying to get the balance across those is a really big challenge as well. So it's certainly complex, but good that we're all here to rise to the challenge. Dr. Lee, I was interested if you could give us some oversight around, are there certain contexts or therapeutic conditions where you think technology is more relevant than in others? So we can see that there's technology being used, in stroke recovery and mobility. Dementia care is another area where we're seeing more technology. Do we see limitations, or is there something that can be done to broaden the applicability of technology across more therapeutic conditions?
Okay. For quantitative or repetitive or physically demanding tasks such as the rehabilitation training, the robotic technology can be a good solution for that situation. And many other new technologies, for example, AI or the ICT, the communication technology will be used many situations. For example, the AI technology or the companion robots are used to treat or prevent the dementia patient, and mobile phone apps can be applied to diet or medication management for the diabetic patient, or the apps even used for the rehabilitation or the activities of daily living to control the activities. But those technologies are not prevailing now. It is not widely used in these days. It's because I think the market situation, for the elderly people or rehabilitation, is not so big enough. So the technology will be expand to the society. As I told you, the people's mind to new technology should be open. As I told you, the pandemic situation, and especially for the aging society, it is accelerated now. So I think in near future, we can see some kind of rapid expansion of the new technology for the elderly care. Maybe it's beyond the imagination. Okay.
That makes it sound very exciting.
Yeah.
The sky's the limit. Yeah, most definitely. I think, as we were saying before, that we now have a real opportunity, I think, in regards to technology and how we can integrate it better into care. So I guess that leads to a really big question of, when we're seeking to implement these new technologies, what are the most important success factors for not only the research and development side, but then being able to commercialize them and get them out into the homes and the clinics and the hands of the people who need to use them most? Professor Choi, do you have some insights regarding what you think some of the biggest success factors are?
I think actually we have already talked about this many times, even during this very short seminar. I think the most important thing is factor is product attributes meeting the consumer demand. So unmet needs, meeting the demand clearly. And other factors are dependent factors, I think. New technology-based medical devices have different development or growth pathway or steps as compared to the other conventional medical device, which is already well-established scientific medical background. So new tech-based medical device should prove its clinical meaning or effects, efficacy, as the first and most important step. And the proof has very diverse detailed difficulties. It is not simply showing it works in some patients with some outcome. It is not a simple one. Maybe understanding or study of regulatory affairs or science, regulatory science, or clinical evaluation processes will be very helpful or essential for developers, manufacturers to have better kind of navigation in their long journey of this technology development. And this is not technical thing, but I'd like to make a little bit eccentric point for this success factor. I think the persistence is very important. It seems that we have kind of circulatory nature or recurrence in the trend change or technology involvement, evolution. Technology seems not abandoned forever, or has recurring new opportunity. As well known, AI tech has had big winters, like 3-4 times of big winters through the last 40-50 years of their technology history. And telemedicine has seen long, repeated ups and downs, and now it seems getting kind of reboot in this post-pandemic era. So, being persistent with our technology development may be one of kind of hidden success factor, I think.
I really love that point on persistence. I think it's so much of the development of technology and the offering of it is actually trying to get people to change their behavior, to incorporate technology into their everyday life or into their care management. And that's not only for consumers, but also for professionals. So there's a behavioral change aspect, which is there. And I think most of us working in this space of healthcare and health behavior know behavior change is hard. And so persistence, I think, is a really important point, that just if we try something and it doesn't stick the first time, it doesn't mean that we should, step away from it and give up on it. It might just be the wrong timing. And so, yeah, I think that's a really brilliant point and something for us to keep in mind. Dr. Lambercy, is there anything that you have to add regarding what the success factors are?
Well, again, I think it was mentioned by Professor Choi as well. I think for me as a scientist, I also want to see scientific evidence. I think that's primarily important for these technologies to make it to the convince healthcare professionals and other stakeholders. I mentioned insurance companies for reimbursement, for example. I think it's important to get this scientific evidence to have people invest and support the use of specific technologies. Cost, of course, plays a role, right? We touched about that. Most of these technology remain too expensive for individuals to buy, so we need to get to that. I think I really like also the point of perseverance and also changing of mindset. I think you're totally right that when we see that, right, people now, everybody has a mobile phone, a smartphone, everybody has apps that to some extent collect data or inform about some kind of healthcare, provide some kind of healthcare information. So probably 10 years ago, this would have been impossible to think like that. And I think people see even more, again, through the situation with the pandemic, that there is a need for maybe this digital intervention or digital technologies to take even one step further, so that you don't have to go to the doctor all the time, so that you can get in contact with your doctor through other means, or get some input about your health status through other means. And this might be one positive aspect of this pandemic situation. It opened the eyes on many things. It also opened the eyes of policymakers, of funding agencies, that we really need this digital transformation, and I think that's a huge potential there. Of course, as I also touched before, it brings other challenges. How do you deal with the data management? How do you deal with data privacy? You're collecting potential information about health from people. How do you make sure this is safe? Who can access that? So that brings a whole level of new questions.
It certainly does. And I think there's one other thing that comes to mind as you both shared your thoughts here, is the value of scientific evidence and having the indicators of the effectiveness of a solution. I think then, and this is my business and marketing background coming through, but it's then also how do we communicate that? So it's one thing for science to come up with the insights to demonstrate the efficacy of something, but how do we then communicate that in a way that health professionals and patients and family caregivers can understand the value that it can add to their life, and to increase that as well. So I think there's also this challenge of bridging that gap between science and research, and then speaking the language of the consumers to get that out there. And I think this is where we need to encourage more and more the research world and the business and commercial world to come together to determine the best way to create solutions that will be successful in market. So now we've got 5 minutes left. I would love for each of the panel members just to share with us their most important piece of advice for researchers, for individuals, for startups, for organizations, whoever it is, about their advice regarding developing technical solutions for elderly care, something that can really make an impact on helping people to live better lives and more independently as they age. Dr. Lee, over to you first.
Okay. So in fact, I don't have much successful experience. So let me tell you a few obvious, basic, or theoretic story about theory. First of all, it is necessary to understand, as you told us, the pain point. Understand the pain points in the target care is quite important. And also importantly, as I told you in Caribot case, you should examine whether the technology will create new or additional pain point because of that technology or not is another important issue when you develop the technology. In addition, the technology need to provide the certain value, clinical value or economic value to the care system. It is also important. And it's because I'm from industry. I would like to say about this thing, for making long-lasting technology. The value created by the technology must form an kind of economic value chain. The technology, the value can be changed into some kind of money. It is important for long-lasting technology, I think.
Great, thank you, Dr. I think you're right. It's not only about what's effective and what works, but what's economically viable and can have that impact as well. And I think this is where health economics also comes in. Having health economists a part of this multi-stakeholder approach to developing solutions becomes important as well, to really be able to determine that value. Professor Choi, over to you. What's your piece of advice?
Okay, again, this is not a technology thing. I think, as Amy pointed out, communication is very important. So I'd like to advise all of you or other researchers to increase your communication with each stakeholder as much as you can. So go out and meet the patient, meet doctor, meet engineer, meet regulator, meet all the stakeholders to find out the need correctly, to find out the situation correctly, to find out, to study about new technology. So communication is very important. And actually, that's my weakest point, and I'm trying my own best to increase my communication volume. But anyway, we are human, and we are working for human with our skills and technology. Then our most important and what we can best do is, I think, communication. And increasing the volume of communication is one of the key things we need to do. We need to pursue persistently, I think.
Thank you, Professor Choi. And I think you also made a good point that you need to speak to all the different stakeholders, because what they see as value in the solution will vary depending on whether it's the payer of the solution, the health professional, the patient. So it's what's the appeal for each of those different groups, and then how do you communicate, tailor your communications to each of them respectively. Thank you. Dr. Lambersy, what's your piece of advice?
Unmute first. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with what has been said. So for me, I'll see two key aspects. As I said before, focus on simplicity. So I think too many technologies are developed to meet too many goals, and they result in too complicated systems that end up not being usable by your target population, being, for example, elderly, or they're not meeting the needs of the user, and therefore they are rejected, even though, but from a technical perspective, these solutions might be very interesting. But if they don't meet the need of the user, then following on that, the second point is really to go and involve the user, as Professor Choi just said, increase the communication and involve the end user, all the stakeholders in all steps technology development cycle. So really focus on this user-centered design, but not just the end user, everyone. I think if I can pick up the question that is in the chat as well, like the healthcare provider should be involved in this from the very beginning as well, right? The technology has to be developed with the user, but also with the clinician that would, let's say, recommend the use of this device or not, or this technology or not at the end, right? So they all have their say in how technology will be accepted in the end. So they have to be involved at all steps of the development. So really from understanding the needs to developing the ideas, to developing the concept, the prototypes, and the evaluation afterwards. So really all aspects. Yeah, and technology developers, they need to take the input, right? They need to be self-critical and just not think that patients don't know. No, they know what they need, right? So we need to reflect on that and be open to the feedback from all the stakeholders. That's the key point, in my opinion.
Great, thank you so much. And we have perfectly timed ourselves, which is wonderful. So I think we've shared some really interesting insights today. I think we can all acknowledge that COVID-19 has changed a lot for the world in good and bad ways. But I think one of the areas of potential really is in this area of technology, how people are receptive to it, they're using it more. And there's really a big opportunity here for us now who have been working in this space for many years to really push forwards in getting our solutions developed and into the market. And I think now more than ever, the rise of adoption of technology also helps with a lot of this user engagement as well. It's much easier to connect with people virtually as well as face-to-face. So we can get a lot more of these insights and user engagement from these different stakeholder groups. So I think it's a very exciting time to be working in this area. And hopefully, I know for myself, it's been very insightful and inspiring to hear from our speakers today and to learn from your experiences. And I trust that it's been the same experience for everyone joining us today as well. So it feels weird. I mean, you can clap behind your screens, but show some acknowledgement for our speakers today. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Choi, Dr. Lee and Dr. Lambercy. It's been a great session. And now is time for everyone to move back to the stage for the end, for the rest of the event. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Amy. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Welcome, everybody, to the session on cell and gene therapy. As you've heard from Alessandra, my name is Orlando Scherer. I work at UNIST and the IBS Center for Genomic Integrity, and it's my pleasure to moderate this session. So we'll hear two talks about Dr. Sora Park and Sayezde First Ladani, and then we'll have a panel discussion on these talks and the topics covered in the talks in a bit broader area. And we'll be joined there by Dr. Maximilian Mouron from Aviron Therapeutics. Okay, so without further ado, let's maybe get started with the first talk. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Sora Park, who is the chair and founder of the Regenerative Medicine Acceleration Foundation, and where it is the Advanced Regenerative Medicine Support Organization designated by the Health Ministry and Welfare since March 2012. And she will tell us about the opportunities and challenges for regenerative medicine and cell therapy in South Korea. So Dr. Park, please go ahead. And just a little logistics, so we have 20 minutes for each speaker. And then we have the panel discussion, and then everybody's free to ask questions at the end. You can already put your questions in the Q&A tab during the session.
Could you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yes.
Welcome. We look forward to your presentation.
Nice to meet you. Thank you, Dr. Orlando Scherer, for your kind introduction. Okay. Did you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. First, I would like to give a big thanks to the organizing committee of this forum for giving me an opportunity to deliver this talk today. It is a great honor. As you may know, the new Korean Act on Advanced Regenerative Medicine was enacted from last August, and a lot of changes in RM industry ecosystem are happening now. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to introduce what Korea has done and the opportunities and the challenges in Korea with the new RM Act. This slide shows the global and Korean cell-based product from 2011 to 2015. In 2011, Korea FDA approved the first stem cell therapeutics in the world. There were 3 more stem cell products. After 2015, the number of cell and gene modified product and stem cell product in the world increased, but relatively few products were approved in Korea, and most of products developed by Korean companies are somatic cell therapeutics. In March of this year, Kimria was approved, and Zolgensma was approved in this May. Total 339 RM clinical trials were conducted in Korea for 14 years until last year. As you can see here, about 64% of the approved clinical trials are SIT, and 36% of them are IIT. Clinical trials of gene and cell therapy has been on rise since 2017, but cell therapy clinical trials still account for most of these, among to 82%, and the stem cell therapy makes up most of the clinical trials among these. This table shows the status of reimbursement of RM product in Korea. In Korea, we have 16 domestic cell therapies entered the market. Among them, 3 somatic cell product and 1 stem cell product are covered by national health insurance. South Korea has a single-payer national health insurance system for all people since 1999. Benefits coverage rate of national health insurance is 63.2% in 2016. The reality is that the great deal of expensive treatment is not covered by this insurance. Lately, life insurance companies developed insurance products for uncovered medical services, and about 66.3% of Koreans have this insurance. This private insurance guarantee 90% of medical cost, and high-cost RM products are reimbursed by this private insurance. As I know, Novartis Kimria passed a panel review at the Health Insurance Review and Assessment Service, the first of multiple steps to get health insurance coverage. Many cancer patients and family members hope the government to develop insurance policy based on the value of a patient life. And also they hope the companies to come up with specific plans for finance allocation, cooperating with the government. As of November 2021, there are 95 Korean companies developing cell and gene therapies. Of these, 50 companies were listed on the stock market, and a total of 25 companies are currently in process of implementing clinical trials. As you can see here, within 2 years, the number of cell gene therapeutic companies has increased. This means the Korean RM industry environment is very active and very promising. Under the name of a Council for Advanced Regenerative Medicine, we called CAM, Korean RM Company Association has been launched in 2016, supported by Ministry of Health Welfare. COM started with 25 members. As of April of this year, it has 71 members in total, which include 40 specialized in cell therapies, 11 with enabling technology, and 13 CRO and CMO, and 6 investment company, and 1 other related organization. The COM's mission is to promote Korean RM industry and establish an international collaboration hub. Recently, Korean RM companies are engaged in various financing activities, not only at home, but also abroad. This slide shows the selected business event in 2021. I'm not gonna explain in details, but I would like to say the driving force in financing sector is very strong, not only for startup, but also for mid-sized companies in Korea. And the Korean RM companies are trying to find partnership with foreign companies. This slide shows how the regenerative medicine bill became a law in Korea. Actually, 2 bills were united as a single law. One is the bill on the support and the safety management of advanced regenerative medicine by Ministry of Health Welfare, and other is the bill of advanced biopharmaceuticals by Korean FDA. The full name of this act is Act on the Safety and Support for Advanced Regenerative Medicine and Advanced Biopharmaceutical. It is quite a long name, so it is referred to as the Advanced Regenerative Bio Act. This act was enforced from last August. This slide shows the overall process of new regenerative medicine regulation. As I mentioned in the previous slide, because 2 bills were immersed into 1 act, there are 2 tracks. One is ARM track for clinical research, and the other is ABP track for commercial development. The scope of ARM and ABP is the same. They include 4 categories of cell therapy, gene therapy, tissue engineered therapy, and combination therapy. In ARM track, hospitals and clinics who want to conduct clinical research should be certified as a regenerative medicine institution in advance. Cell processing facilities provide therapies for clinical research, and they also need a certification of MFDS in advance. Only the certified regenerative medicine institution, so hospitals, can submit a clinical research plan, and the review committee decides its approval or not. The high-risk therapies need an additional approval by MFDS. Safety management institution will do safety monitoring, planning of long-term follow-up of clinical subject. Korean CDC is designated as a safety management institution. In the ABP track, in the ABP track for commercial development, most of these processes is similar with the drug approval process. The difference is companies first need a certification as a management business for human cells, and then they can submit an IND as before. NFDS is in charge of the review and approval process. They adopted a tailed priority review process and the conditional approval scheme. Because time is running out, I would like to skip several slides which have same explanation with in previous slide. So I would like to move on the opportunity and challenges. This slide shows the importance of the Asian regenerative medicine market. As you can see here, compound annual growth rate forecasted for Asia market is the highest from 2018 to 2020. 2030, and the Asia market is expected to reach 72.2 billion in 2030. Although currently in the Asian market is too small to attract interest from RM companies, it will far outperform than the US and Europe market. More importantly, the market size will be comparable to Europe in 2030. This means the Asia market will be very attractive. Therefore, I would like to recommend the Asia market as your first choice offshore market. At this point, the scale of Korean market in global RM market is not that significant, honestly. However, I would like to say that Korean market has a strong potential for growth. The reason is in Asian market, especially in Northeast Asia market, Korea is the best spot to develop this market because of its geographical location. As the center of the Northeast Asia market, from Korea, there are more than 60 cities with over 1 million people within 3.5-hour flight. In addition to geographic attractiveness, Korea has very excellent R&D infra, which is essential for scientific and medical innovation. Especially what I would like to emphasize here is the first medical centers of excellence for clinical trials. Ministry of Health Welfare has been running the research-driven hospital, and there are 10 designated hospitals. Finally, I would like to add carefully reimbursement in RM product into the Korean market's attractiveness. As Korean status on the reimbursement has been previously covered, I will move to the next part. The new Act on RM specifies the 5 RM-related government department. 5 ministries make a 5-year master plan together to promote RM, and each ministry renew it annually for implementation. The policy committee will help the process, and the main contents of the master plan are on the right panel. ARM and the ABP Policy Committee announced the first 5-year master plan on this January. Ministry of Science and ICT and the Ministry of Health Welfare made the joint R&D fund, and it has been started from this July. Total budget is about $600 million for 10 years, and they will invest the basic research, translational research, and early phase of clinical trial. Ministry of Health Welfare made the clinical research fund for the ARM track of the new act. We have Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy is in the process of preparing a new R&D fund for innovation of cell and gene therapeutic manufacturing. The purpose of this fund is the promotion of manufacturability. I think this fund could supply the new opportunities for the international collaboration. In the new act, the supporting organization is newly established, and it is the only one private-public partnership organization for commercialization. Our foundation, RMF, was designated as the supporting organization on this March. As I was introduced, we have 3 main policies, 3 main roles. And the first one is policy support as a national think tank in RM, and clinical research support in terms of designation of RM institution, hospital, and design RM education program. And we support clinical research fund. And finally, we support RM industry revitalization in terms of accelerating the commercialization, international network, and global partnership in RM field. Recently, ARM public-private partnership has been organized to gather opinions from domestic stakeholders and to promote public opinion. The units of the ARM PPP the government department and related organization and patient association, civic groups, and consumer association and industry association, academic association. Our foundation, RMF, is modulating a series of online PPP forum in conjunction with the Ministry of Health Welfare. As you can see in this table, a 3-round forum has been held once a month since this August. The outline of 3 forums is as the following. Guest speakers from abroad have been invited to each forum, and they have delivered insightful speech on each country's status of patient accessibility to RM, covering research and product. Considering these cases, all committee members keep communicating and putting their heads together so that reasonable policies applicable to Korean healthcare environment could be suggested. This slide shows the global network of COM with RMAP. COM signed MOU with 4 global organizations, FOM in Japan, OSBiotech in Australia, ARM of the United States, and ISCT. Through such MOU, COM and RMAP constantly find cooperation areas and the cooperation method with RM leading organizations of the world. Furthermore, we have exchanged our view on the business models and made the relevant operational approaches to companies specialized in RM. I would like to wrap up my talk with the slide. Korea is the best spot for the RM players. COM and RMF could support the strategic partnership between Korea and overseas companies. Thank you very much for your attention, and it was a great honor for me to have a chance to give a speech today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Park, for this interesting presentation showing how the network is for, the framework is for regenerative therapies in Korea. If you have any questions for Dr. Park, please put them in the Q&A tab, and then we'll address them during the discussion session. All right.
Okay.
So then we move on to our next speaker, Dr. Sayeste Fürst-Ladini, who's joining us from Basel. Welcome. And she is the CEO and founder of the Solution for Life Sciences. So this is an organization, company that provides global strategic support for the development of healthcare products, particularly in the realm of rare diseases and these innovative therapies. And so without further ado, please go ahead, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to set up my screen. I have 2 screens somehow. Good. Moving to the next slide. Can you please go? Thank you. Okay, so that's about SFL. We are a premium consulting company providing multidisciplinary support from very early development to registration and market access for life science field, including also, of course, advanced therapy medicinal product. Moving to the next slides. So in my today's presentation, I will first briefly talk about the challenges that advanced therapies faces, followed by the regulatory framework for advanced therapies in Switzerland and European Union, and conclude with an outlook on an innovative ecosystem for advanced therapies. The next slide, please. The scientific advances in biomedicines and biotechnology have created a new group of innovative therapies for the treatment of diseases and dysfunction. They offer new promising treatments for previously incurable diseases, especially in the area of the rare disease, orphan diseases. If we look at the advanced therapies, there are actually quite a heterogeneous group of products that have very complex in their characteristics that include cell therapies, gene therapies, and tissue engineered products. These advanced products are defined and regulated differently also in different territorial areas. These products are defined also, they're quite highly personalized and really differ from the traditional treatments in terms of they are made, developed, manufactured, administered, and they have also the potential and the promise to cure the disease, even by one single administration. Although the number of the advanced therapies that are authorized on the market are still very limited, but it's a new technology, it's a new science, so the pipeline is growing. And if we look about from the 220 clinical trials worldwide in advanced therapy, there are already over 150 that are in phase 3 stage. So that's, I think, quite promising. Moving to the next slide, please. So looking at some barriers that are quite specific also for the advanced therapy during the development, but also authorization post-market. And that's really, we can see, is on one hand quite a high upfront cost to really develop the product, and that differs from traditional treatments, a very complex manufacturing process. The major challenges for ATMPs also concern the requirement in clinical trials. And because it's a very specific product, it's limited, usually most of the trials are also in the orphan diseases, but anyway, there's a limited number of patients available. And the follow-up time also is really to difficulties, also to really recruit the patients for these innovative products. The gold standard of the randomized controlled clinical trials is very challenging to apply for the advanced therapy medicinal product, especially in the rare diseases, and where actually you cannot really blind the product and provide the placebo to patients. The regulatory requirements for ATMPs, especially those that include genetically modified organisms, GMO, that also needs to be considered. In some countries, it's necessary, for instance, for clinical trial, if you have a GMO, first to get a relevant GMO authorization from a specific institution before submitting a clinical trial application. Given this development and regulatory complexities, there are also scientific uncertainties during the benefit risk assessment. And that's what also the authorities really apply the specific benefit assessment for evaluating the product, either during clinical trial and even more at the time of the evaluation of marketing authorization application. And that leads also to the specific requirement also for pharmacovigilance. We are talking about the product that actually patients receive and will be, especially in case of gene therapy, lifelong in the patients. So the level of risk is really much more higher, and the uncertainty, and therefore quite a lot of also post-approval safety requirements need to be fulfilled. Because of all these reasons, and that majority of the ATMPs really do, because the development is so specific, they do not have this evidence generation that usually the payers actually are looking for the reimbursement of product. And that leads really quite to a lot of challenges. You may have heard of one of these companies that developed and got actually approval of gene therapy product in Europe 2 years ago. They announced and actually closed the entire European infrastructure and withdraw the license because they couldn't get reimbursement of the product. So that's a really huge challenge. Moving to the next slide. Could you please? Yeah, okay, thank you so much. So now looking at the regulatory framework in Switzerland. So here you can see the products that are under the advanced therapy in Switzerland are really differentiated. On one hand, the so-called in vivo gene therapy products, and on the bottom you can see the so-called transplant products that include ex vivo gene therapy, cell therapy, and tissue engineering products. All of these 4 categories together are classified or understood under the advanced therapies. And what you may are more familiar from the European perspective is advanced therapy medicinal product, or ATMP. So to have really this classification as the transplant product, that's quite Swiss specific, the term and how the classification are done in Switzerland. If we go to the next slide. So if we want to look what is really the definition of the transplant products, in the Swiss law, we have a transplantation ordinance that provides the following definition. There are products that consist or contain human organs, tissues, or cells where they have been substantially processed, or the term that you may are more familiar, manipulated. So it's a substantial manipulation of products and are not intended to perform the same function in the recipients. For instance, it's not an organ that just you make an organ transplants from one recipient to the donor, but it will have a different intended use and products that consist of organ, tissue, and cells. The substantial manipulation is also defined in the ordinance, would be manipulation of cells via the cell culture, genetic modification of cells, and also differentiation or activation of cells. Moving to the next slide. So the legal basis for the products, transplant products in Switzerland are under this transplant ordinance. And here it says that these products are analog to the medicinal product. That means that developer of the products need, of course, on one hand, to follow the requirements of transplantation ordinance, but also from the therapeutic product act TPA that is applicable to our medicinal product. The gene therapy products are also subject, of course, to the TPA. What's important maybe to mention that Swissmedic has a dedicated transplant unit. The transplant unit you can see on the right side is responsible for instance, inspection of the manufacturing facility, developing advanced therapies, for giving scientific advice, for setting up national standards, but also internationally they are quite active and have interaction with other authorities and also part of the ICH. And they, of course, review the marketing authorization application and also issue the establishment license for the companies. If you have a GMOs, then in this case, also in addition to the transplant unit of the Swissmedic, the Experts Committee for Biosafety, the Federal Office of Public Health, and also for Environment would be involved in the evaluation of clinical trial as well as for the marketing authorization application. I think alone this shows really the importance of the advanced therapy and really being very specific, that requires specific experts within the Swissmedic, but also additional expert to make sure, especially with regard to the safety, safe product would reach the patients. Moving to the next slide. So the Assistive and the local ethics committees are the main regulatory authorities if you want to perform clinical trials. For in vivo gene therapy, there are parallel submission also to the Federal Office for the Environment is needed. Usually the approval time would be 30 days, but for cell therapy, advanced therapy products, it's usually 60 days. So it's twice. Again, that's highlights it is more time required to really review this product. The applicable legislation would be on one hand, you can see the TPA Transplantation Act, but also Gene Therapy and Human Research Act. If you are doing clinical trials, of course, you need to follow the requirement and the ordinance and clinical trials. And you can see here also that the statistic for the clinical trials in Switzerland with regard to the transplant products from 2019 to 2020 actually tripled. And of course, if you are doing clinical trials, you have to make sure that you follow the requirement of GMP and ICH and of course GCP requirements. Moving to the next slide. Thank you. So here is the process when you are doing clinical trials. As a sponsor of clinical trials, you would submit to Swissmedic, but also to Ethics Committee. And after the formal control, the review would start. And as mentioned, if you have a gene therapy, in addition, involvement of Federal Office of Public Health, Expert Committee for Biosafety, and Federal Office for Environment would be needed. And you would then receive consolidated feedback and usually list of questions that you have to answer. In a case of the successful, successfully answering the questions, you would then get a positive decision and could commence with the clinical trial. Moving to the next slide. So I think one thing is really to consider in Switzerland, the transplant products are specifically classified, and that is quite Swiss specific. Also, the substantial manipulation criteria in Swiss law, it actually follows the EU regulation for ATMP, but how it is applied via the various acts and ordinances led to ambiguities in practice. So important to mention that it's an ongoing partial revision of the Transplantation Act in Switzerland. For instance, if you have a CAR-T therapy, so the CAR-T is by Swissmedic also classified as a transplant, but that actually has no legal basis currently. So as part of the revision, CAR-T product would be then added to the Transplantation Act that are legally covered under this act. Also, Swissmedic is considering to introduce maybe potential special authorization for a transplant product that is manufactured and used on individual patient in a hospital setting, which is not as part of a clinical trial or is not authorized. You may are familiar with the term hospital exemption at the EU level, so that would be comparable to that, which I will now come in a minute, which also has its challenges. So the outlook would be really the current efforts regarding corresponding Swiss ATMP regulation to be evaluated within the context also of the revision of the TPA. Moving to the next slide. Thank you. So moving now to the EU, you can see the main, regulation directives that are applicable if you are developing advanced therapy. Of course, the ATMP regulation, but as in similar to Switzerland, ATMP products fall under the are also medicinal product. That means you need also to follow the requirements of the Directive 2001/83 that is applicable to all medicinal products, and Regulation 726 is especially for centralized product, which is applicable to ATMP products. So ATMP products are from the blood, tissue, and cells, so that means you need to also follow the requirement and fulfill the requirements of the corresponding directive, especially Directive 2004/23. Many of the advanced therapy products are combined with a medical device for the administration. That's why we have the term also combined ATMP. And as you may be familiar, this year, the medical devices regulation in EU came into force, which means in case of a combined product, you need also to fulfill the requirement of the medical devices regulation. So that makes it all quite complex. Moving to the next slides. So here you can see for the ATMP, what's really very important that all the ATMPs, because they are also the highest risk products, that can only be evaluated by the European Medicines Agency via the centralized authorization process. The EMEA has a specific committee called Committee for Advanced Therapies, CAT, consists of the multidisciplinary experts, and they assess and evaluate from the quality, safety, and efficacy of ATMP and provide their feedback. One could say that maybe similar or to the transplant unit at Swissmedic. It will be a single evaluation, that is also the marketing authorization would be then valid in all EU member states. In the context of the hospital exemption, that's the responsibility of each EU member state, and they would then also, set the requirements that this product needs to be under the hospital exemption and the market, and that leads to quite some, I would say, challenges and different, maybe safety and efficacy requirement applied across the member states. During the development of ATMP, what's also important to consider, it's possible for company to ask the CAT for the classification of the product, And a list of the assessed medicinal product and classification recommendation of the CAT is usually published on the EMA website. In 2020, the CAT made actually 30% more classification requirement than 2019. I think that on one hand side shows that more product, advanced therapy product is being developed, but also more complex product that is not clear which category of advanced therapy the product is. Also, as one of the initiatives from the European Commission to support small, medium-sized enterprises, the Committee of Advanced Therapy provides also certification procedures for ATMPs that are in development. They can look at the quality data or if the company has already non-clinical data. And this certification process is especially important and useful for the small companies when they are in the, for instance, financing round. That would help them to get actually funding or for the due diligence, etc. Because that shows some proof from the highest institute at the European Union level that looked at your product and classified as certified as an ATMP. A majority of ATMPs are developed and those that are approved also in the orphan diseases. And this has been really also increasing the number of application of ATMP for orphan drug designation in the recent years. To support the development of medicines for which there is a high unmet medical need, which majority of the ATMPs in development belong to, the EMA also launched the so-called PRIME scheme. And if we look here, there are already 2 years after the PRIME scheme was launched, 19 products that had this scheme was granted PRIME status were actually ATMPs. Because most of these products are really in the rare diseases, so that means at the time that they submit actually for the marketing authorization application, they don't have all the data that would be needed to lead to a full approval. That's why the majority of the product are either under the conditional approval, which means they have a condition, majority clinical trials or patients registry that needs to be followed up and provide the data at a later stage and to turn it to full authorization, or even exceptional circumstances. That means that this product never will have the usual, efficacy and safety data that would be needed to get a full approval. And so that means, again, this product are under very high scrutiny and review by the authorities, by the EMEA. Moving to the next slides. Yeah. So the European Commission, after several years, the ATP regulation came into force. The Commission made an evaluation and published an implementation report of the regulation. The Commission highlighted that there is a need to streamline the procedures for the evaluation of ATMP. The Commission also came to the conclusion that member states interpret the requirements for the hospital exemption very differently, and that a broad use of the exemption could lead to a missing efficacy and safety product being used on patients. As a result, the Commission and the EMEA published a joint action plan for the ATMP that with the aim to streamline the procedures and better address the specific requirements of ATMP developers. Also, the EMEA published scientific guidelines and the GMP and GCP guidelines for ATMPs. There is also a reflection process on the hospital exemption initiated, as well as an coherent assessment in EU regarding the application of GMO rules. Although there are supporting regulatory processes in place, like early scientific advice, PRIME, etc. Last week, I was attending a stakeholder meeting by the EMEA, by the CAT, about the ATMP, and that was a statistic was shown that actually a majority of the companies that communicate to the EMEA, they want to submit their file marketing authorization application, have huge delays, and I think it was. They will submit by January 20, and by December, 1 year later, only 3 companies submitted. And interestingly, that was not only by the small companies, but also by the big pharma company. I think this again highlights the challenges for really developing this product. It's really very, very big for also big pharma companies to get the data and time to submit to the authorities. And the EMA as well as the Commission have put the ATMP as one of their key focus areas in the Strategy Regulatory Science 2025, as well as EU Pharma Strategy. Moving to the next slide.
If you could wrap up your presentations in 2 to 3 minutes, so we have enough time for the discussion. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, Orlando. Yeah. So the outlook is that we need an innovative ecosystem that is agile and offer a collaborative framework that reflects on the appropriate regulatory framework for new innovation products that allows early interaction between regulators and developers of the advanced therapies, and really need for a tailored approach. We need to have a close patient follow-up, patients registers, etc., that to offer long-term data that would also support and maybe meet the payers and requirements. We need to have timely and sustainable patients access to advanced therapy. We need to raise global awareness for this product, and also exchange of the regulatory authorities, for instance, by the EMA, FDA's parallel scientific advice, and the cooperation on health technology assessment. Moving to the last slide. Okay, good. So here we need really to also foster the harmonization, to have a coherent approach for the assessment of these novel products. We need to have a global convergence of the requirements for ATMP, and also promote the use of real-world data, especially for ATMP, because it's not possible really as part of perform randomized controlled clinical trial. The Darwin initiatives that will come in 2022 in force will increase the capacity to take the high-quality observational study based on real-world data. With that, I would like to thank you and close my presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for this great presentation and the overview of these regulatory issues. And so we now will start the discussion panel. So for all of you listening, please put any questions you have specifically to the presentations in the Q&A, and you can also put there any issues that you think would be appropriate to discuss with the panel. So we've heard from our two speakers, and now I would like to, just disappeared, to welcome Dr. Maximilian Mouron. Let me just wait for him to come back. Again, please put your questions in the chat. All right. I wanted to wait to have our third panelist introduce himself and tell us a little bit about the company he works for, so that we can have know what we're talking about here. Wait 20 more seconds and then we'll start with the discussion with him. All right. Hello, Dr. Monroe. We're just ready for the discussion now. So welcome to the panel.
Yes.
And so we've heard the two presentations, and I would be grateful if you could briefly introduce your company and what you do. So Maximilian Monroe is a scientific executive who's worked for a lot of startup companies for 20 plus years, for Celestia and many other companies. Most recently, he joined and co-founded, I guess, Avrion Therapeutics. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about your newest venture.
Absolutely.
What the company is about and how it relates to the presentations we've heard.
Absolutely. So thank you, Orlando, for your kind introduction. Our company, Avrion Therapeutics, is a spin-off from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, which is based on more than a decade of research at the Brain Mind Institute. And our focus is precision gene therapies for neurological disorders. Why? Because while therapeutic areas like oncology have been subject to tremendous progresses over the past 20 years with targeted therapies, antibodies, immuno-oncology, therapies to address neurodegenerative disorders are lagging behind, and probably because we have not been able to use the right modalities to address those disorders. Now, with the booming of gene therapies of the past years, we think there's a huge opportunity here to address genetically defined indications and others with this new modality. And we have developed vectors that can target specific cell types within the central nervous system to maximize the effect of the therapeutic transgene, while at the same time reducing the risks of untargeted or off-target effects in unwanted tissues. And so we are interested mostly in neuromuscular indications, I would say, and we have a focus on amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is a devastating disease with no cure today, but we are also interested in other neuromuscular indications, and we are a seed stage company right now raising Series A. So what I've heard today is extremely interesting because it brings some of my daily challenges on the table, which is the entry cost in gene therapy development of gene therapy product are extremely high. The cost of manufacturing are extremely high, and you have to raise huge amount of monies to be able to move to the next step. Thank you, Orlando.
Thank you very much. So if I understand you correctly, yours is a traditional form of gene therapy, but the novelty here is the vectors you have to target.
Absolutely. We use, yeah, thank you for bringing this. So we use adeno-associated virus capsids. And for the moment, the current products are based on known serotypes of AAVs, but we have a discovery program to engineer also the capsids to address specific glial cells. So in a nutshell, so far the innovation is focused on the vector, but the next one will be vector and capsid.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And so one of the things that I find very interesting, so as we've heard, cell and gene therapies are very specific forms of treatment and are also quite involved in the development and manufacture. So can you maybe all of you briefly recap where you think the biggest market is, what types of disease they'll be particularly useful for, as opposed to treatments that where we can have traditional drug-based treatments? What are the most important markets and modalities for treatment?
Hi, this is Shaista. Sorry that my video still doesn't work. So I think, as mentioned in my presentation, I think for the advanced therapy, for the currently, but also I would say the next decade would be really orphan diseases, because we need also to consider we are talking about the most innovative, novel, and risky products. So that's also needs, experience that the developers, science, but also regulators need to collect how to deal with this product, how to manufacture this product in a consistent and retrospective way. And then that all, I think, will be really also the acceptance to use such a highest risk product for an area where there is an absolute need and there is no other cure and treatment possible and available that use these products. And that's why we see most are really genetic diseases that use advanced therapy products.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Park, would you agree? Or from a Korean perspective, are there maybe additional, more mainstream or larger diseases with not larger number of patients that are of consideration in Korea? Your microphone is muted.
Yeah, actually, there are around 10,000 known diseases in the world, and among those, it can be said that only 500 diseases are available for treatment. Therefore, I believe that, and many scientists believe that the rest of diseases can be the subjects to the further developed in cell and gene therapies field. So I think, as you may know very well, we have been witnessing the great advance in the cell and gene therapies for currently incurable diseases, even if there is still lots of challenges to fully capture the therapeutic potentials of cell and gene therapies. And in addition to refractory and metastatic malignancies, and the cell and gene therapies shall be the truly effective therapeutic solutions for the variety of diseases, from genetic disorders such as hemophilia and the sickle cell disease, even if to infectious disease such as COVID-19. So in Korea, especially in clinical research field, many government and many industry wants to driven many very rare disease will be welcomed.
Okay, so the whole history of clinical trials of gene therapies has, of course, a very interesting past with many ups and downs, particularly early in development. Is the general consensus that these problems have now largely been solved, so that it's not a broader issue and we just need to focus on individual diseases or types of diseases to target, but that the bigger issues have been addressed?
Maybe I can comment. Our Chief Development Officer, Harald Petri, has brought on the market Glybera in Europe and was the former CSO at Unicure. And so I think, at least in the field of AAV-based gene therapies, there are like two big categories. The therapies where the gene therapy product is administered to, let's call it, a compartment of your body, like the eye or the central nervous system by intrathecal administration or in the brain. And the fact that the gene therapy addresses a compartment like the eye limits the spread of the virus throughout the body and potential toxicities. The challenges have been when you want to inject IV gene therapies, due to a long list of potential problems, from cryptic transcription from the ITRs to unwanted expression of the transgene, etc., that I don't want to, and viral load throughout the body. So I would say, of course, I'm talking here only, I have an AAV-centric view of the question, but I would say it depends on the therapy, and it depends on the indication, and if this indication is prone to, let's call it, a local administration of the gene therapy rather than a fully systemic, that could be still challenging. I would say the other thing is that in front of the regulatory authorities, if you can prove that you're safe and you address an unmet need, I think that this is the best way to be able to design a phase 1/2 trial with one phase 1 dose escalation and safety, which is in general 2 doses for an AAV-based gene therapy, with a confirmatory cohort, where you would already seek for efficacy. And at the end of a phase 1/2, you could seek for a conditional approval, at least this as possible in Europe, subject to long-term follow-up of patients, of course, but you could seek for a conditional approval. And this is when you're positioning yourself in indications where there's nothing, and practically speaking, that's the only solution for patients.
Okay, so maybe related to that, considering that the diseases we look at here have a very small number of patients in many cases, how do you design a clinical trial? As we've already heard in the presentations, that's not you cannot go the standard way with the double-blinded trial. So what are the requirements and what are the strategies for companies to address this?
I mean, at least from our side is whenever you develop such product, you need to perform a market test upfront, which is to talk to the end users of your product, which will be the clinical investigator who might one day consider treating their patients with your product. And you have to have them on board early on. And if they are convinced that this is a solution that could bring benefits to their patients, they will help you building or paving the way to the clinical trials. They will even push you to go faster in the clinics. So I would say to have on board key opinion leaders for the indication you want to position your product is a very important step, and having them on board in the design of the trial, in the conception of the trial, and also deciding on the endpoints and where the trial will take place is a critical point to prepare for the trial, such as when you start the trial, patients are already sort of aware of what's going on, and you have created a pre-marketing wave.
So if you have a new vector, say, or new treatment, do you do safety and trials also with healthy individuals, or do you go straight to the patients?
No, you can go straight to not only patients, but I would even say genetically defined, biomarker selected patients.
Yeah, so you select at the very earliest stages, you go to the very specific selection. Is this the same in Korea, Dr. Park? Microphone, please.
Actually, I'm not good at clinical trial in regulation parts, but I think the clinical trials have highlighted several crucial issues, such as patient selection criteria and cell transplantation or gene therapy methodologies, as well as study designs themselves that ought to be carefully considered in the planning phases of future clinical trials. But in the reality, not to generate clinical and therapeutic evidence with extensive efficacy and safety data, especially in rare diseases, it is worth it to shape the regulatory scheme with learning, and we visit the Japanese regulatory scheme and the US RMAT, and even Right to Try Act. So, I mean, in adaptive regulation is very important. For example, in Korea, it's small numbers in clinical research. We can get many meaningful data, real world evidence. And after that, we can develop many other commercial issues. So we are thinking, so there are between clinical research and commercial development clinical trials, there are connections between them.
Thank you. Well, looks like we lost one of our panelists temporarily. And also just a reminder for all our listeners, please put your questions in the Q&A. I was curious what your view is on the newer technologies that are emerging, for example, CRISPR, genome precision engineering, and related neurotechnology, antisense. How do they fit in your thinking, or do you think this is a different category that's not really what you're concerned with, or is this something that's on your radar?
For who is the question, Orlando?
Maximilian, you can start. Yeah.
Okay, but I don't want to sort of jeopardize the discussion here. And
yeah,
so if anyone else wants to jump in, I have my view on that. But so basically, I would say it's clear that in gene therapy, whatever is providing additional specificity and selectivity at the level of the capsid and tropism for selected cell types or organs, and that's an advantage. CRISPR-Cas9, I think we have to think backwards. 10 years ago, someone had the idea of using RNA as a modality to address some indication. It took 10 years for Moderna to come up with a product that has been a success because it was there at the right time for the right need. So I think it's going to be the same thing, and that's why I think in this race, the US will win over Europe, because US investors are more ready to take risks and invest substantial amount of money in something which will become a game changer and a disruptor
in the future, not necessarily immediate,
but
not
not
necessarily immediate
exactly.
benefit.
Exactly.
I think European investors are more conservative in the sense that they
Totally.
want to see that this is an issue.
Totally.
Shaiste, would you agree with that? Has that been your experience?
Yeah, definitely. I think we see much more maybe hesitant from the European investors really to invest in the CRISPR technology than the US. But I think it's not only for this new technology, but in general, I think it's much easier in the US to get funding for the innovative products. Sorry, the system kicked me out for some reason.
We were talking about the clinical trials, and I was going to ask you about your view of the implications for the regulatory affairs as they relate to the clinical trials and the small number of people that can be enrolled in the clinical trial.
Yeah, thanks, Orlando. Yes, I think if we look, there are really specific in EU, for instance, there's a specific guidance for performing clinical trials in a small population. So we really recommend companies that are developing innovative products in a small population of disease to follow the guidance. And what's really is important, because it's not only that you don't know how the product will develop, also the regulators don't know. Therefore, it's really important to have early dialogue with the regulator and to get their feedback and develop together, bring them on board, and to get the feedback as early as possible, make sure that you are on the right track when you're developing your product.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like this dialogue is working between the companies and the regulators, or do you think there's a need for improvement? Or
I think, of course, there will be always room for improvement, but I think we really recommend to really do this dialogue very, very early, especially if we talk on advanced therapy, because as Maximilian said, usually once you have your first non-clinical, you go directly to the patients. So you do not do the classical healthy volunteer study. So therefore, it's really important to make sure that the data that were generated in the non-clinical can satisfy the regulators' need expectation to give the approval for first into human and directly into the patient. So therefore, the only thing is really to have this dialogue at a very earliest stage. The more they know about the product, the technology, the more they would be also able to provide the feedback.
Thank you. Dr. Park, what do you think the situation is in Korea between the dialogue between the regulators and the people trying to bring products to market?
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure regulatory body agrees with me or not. But anyways, we always say, it's cell and gene therapy regarded as personalized treatment, maybe be designed to evaluate the possibilities of meaningful therapeutic options for patients with no available effective treatments, and especially for life-threatening and or severe conditions, rather than statistical evidence with symptomatic efficacy and safety data. But still, there is no answer. But we should communicate continuously. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then getting back to the prior point, we had heard that maybe in Europe, investors are a little bit less risk friendly than they are in the United States. Where do you think Korea falls within that spectrum?
You mean
in terms of investors, how are they willing to invest into risky products or products still under development?
Yeah, they are eager to find some very high risk technology and companies. So that's why I explained some, our active collaboration activities with the foreign company and company. And in that case, good investors wanted to invest large money for that. So they are.
So you would recommend for the European companies to come to Korea too?
Yeah, absolutely. And
so you think they would be willing to invest, let's say, in a Swiss company, or would they want to invest in a Swiss company that has a collaboration with a Korean company or as a Korean partner? Or
I think either way, yeah. So Swiss company can come to, as I mentioned, Korea is very central of Northeast Asia, so you can come to as offshore market, so it will be very useful, and you can get many fund from private sectors, I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay, good. So take note.
Message well received.
Yeah.
So yes. Then one thing I wanted to address a bit is the cost of gene therapies and related theories. You see it in the news that this can be extremely expensive. Just putting out a number there, say $1 million or so for treatment in some instances. Is this the same in all countries? Is there different price structure, let's say in Korea versus Switzerland versus the US? And related to that, you showed, Dr. Park, you showed in your presentation that the largest market is in the US. But not the highest number of people. Is that because the drug pricing is different, or is it because people take more of those?
Actually,
I would like to just tell you that we would have time for the last question now.
Okay, all right. 5. So we stop at 25.
We will be moving to the stage around 6:26 to 26:27.
Okay. All right. Please go ahead, Dr. Park.
Yeah, actually, what is your question?
About the pricing, and if the pricing is different in US versus Korea versus Europe.
Yeah, actually, our regenerative medicine product, domestic product, is not so expensive in comparison with the Kimlia. So it is, the price is quite sharp for, every patient and the patient families. So, but I think we should deal with, so I think private, so we strongly organize PPP forum for discussing that expensive price. But anyways, it's our, I think, private insurance, as I mentioned before, private insurance can pay some money more, but it's the limit is about 1 million, 1 million, I think. So I think they are thinking about that new product, insurance product for this. So let's see.
So Maximilian, is that an issue that's of concern in your company, or you're focused on developing the science and then take it from there? Or does it go into the planning?
For me, it's an issue in the field, because I think pricing is outrageous, and one should not take patients as hostages. So I know that unfortunately there are different pricing policy worldwide, and it's different in Japan than in Europe than in the US. I would say US, the sky's the limit. So if you have an efficacious treatment, you can claim whatever you want. I think in Europe we are much more reasonable, and I think this is a question which is not yet on the table today. But as I see things, is for the sustainability of the field, this price will have to go down at some point, either per se or through some incentive and reimbursement policies, etc. And
will that be
for
possible
this-
if it becomes more widely available? Or
I would say one parameters to allow this to happen would be to reduce the cost of manufacturing.
right, and so then if you manufacture more treatments, then the cost will go down for manufacturing. That might help.
Exactly, and yeah, so there's a bottleneck here that that will probably be a challenge and be addressed in the years to come.
Okay, maybe Shahisteh, one last word. I think we have to almost move on.
Thanks very much. I agree with the feedback from the colleagues, and I think what's really important, we cannot use the current reimbursement models for the advanced therapy. So we need really work together with the payers, with the regulators, and a model for that once the product is authorized, that also would fulfill the expectation from payers. Otherwise, it is no value to get it approved and then not being able to reimburse. So we need all to be collaborative.
Okay, we just got 2 questions in the chat. Let's see if we still have time to address them. From Jan Pearson, one is, do you believe that a novel ex vivo
stage now? So we will take the note of the question here, and we can
maybe we can email them to the speakers, and
yes,
they can reply. I just saw them as they just came in very recently, and yeah. Okay, well, thank you all the panelists. That was a really interesting discussion. I'm sorry we have to stop so soon. Hopefully on another occasion we can have a longer discussion on all this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, there we go. We've got Christian. He's our first speaker. So today's session is on digital health, and COVID-19 has really accelerated the pace of innovation. There are growing trends in digital healthcare that have previously been present, but through this time, we have seen an incredible explosion in interest among pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, health tech companies, and other players to bring innovation to digital health. Venture funding is increasing dramatically for startups, and the regulatory environment is also starting to warm up. For today's session, we will have 2 presentations, and in these presentations, we will be discussing how COVID-19 has accelerated digital health, how traditional industry is starting to collaborate with different types of companies and different sectors. And also, we are trying to see how there are new synergies in the ecosystems. For our first presentation, we have Christian Teo. He is the head of Novartis Biome for APAC and MEA regions. He focuses on driving success for Novartis digital partnerships and activities so that the company and their partners can deliver impact at scale. He designs strategy and operational activities to deliver improved patient outcomes, and he also works to source, evaluate, and partner with digital health companies. Christian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Mario. Pleasure to be here, and looking forward to sharing some insights with the audience.
Thank you very much. So we'll go ahead and start with your presentation, and at the end of 2 speaker presentations, we will have a joint panel with a discussion.
Okay, sure.
All right, great. Thanks a lot. Take it away.
All right. I'm new to the platform, so let me try and do a share screen. Just give me a moment. Okay.
Christian, you can click on the symbol of the screen with the red bar, and there will be perfect.
Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great, because I can't see myself, so I'll just put this in presentation mode, and please let me know if anyone has any questions or thoughts. Great. So 15 minutes. It's a 4:12 in Singapore, so I guess it's 5:12 in Korea. Let me try and do this by 5:30 Korean time. So yeah, no, very good to meet all of you. This is my first time presenting on a platform like this, so forgive the awkward introduction. I'm Christian, and as Mario has said, I'm the head of the Novartis Biome here in the Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa. So before I tell you a bit about what is the biome here in Novartis, as well as our position and perspective on digital health and open innovation, maybe allow me to give you a quick introduction to sort of let you know who's talking behind this camera here. So you can call me Christian or Chris. I'm based in Singapore, but I've been working in a couple of roles, both within and outside of the region. I do not come from a pharmaceutical background, right? So curiously enough, I joined Novartis about a year ago, where I was asked to take a skill set in open innovation and help Novartis to create a culture of innovation. So I mean, I'm showing you this to I guess, start the presentation on the note that when we talk about innovation, it is not about purely medical innovation or R&D or even pharmaceutical innovation, right? What we need in this industry, and dare I say in this practice, is a group of people from different backgrounds putting themselves together and trying new things, right? And a lot of that translates into the way that we actually run projects and want to partner with the healthcare ecosystem. So this is just a bit about me, and I'm not going to dwell on this and bore you with the details. So today we'll be covering two things, right? So chiefly it'll be what is the Novartis biome? So sometimes you'll see things from us on the web, on LinkedIn, but I think a couple of people have asked the question of what does Novartis actually do in the open innovation space? Why is this important to Novartis? And I guess crucially, how can startups or health techs get involved to co-create patient solutions? So that's the first thing. The second part will be about partnering with healthcare systems. So we fully recognize that it's almost like a tripartite approach to innovation that we want to espouse, right? So on the one hand, you have the startups. On the other hand, you have the healthcare system, the hospital networks, the governments, and then on the other hand, you have the patients, right? So all three of these people come together, and Novartis wants to be a part of that ecosystem to drive change. So we're going to talk a bit about what does that mean tangibly in terms of the initiatives that we run. And the last thing would be a Q&A, which I guess would be addressed in the discussion panel. So I wouldn't do that today. So first and foremost, with regards to digital transformation, a lot of people have heard this already, right? I'm probably preaching to the choir here, right? But why is this important to Novartis, right? Why do we even see a need to do this in partnership with startups or with the ecosystem? I mean, our CEO, Vas basically said it right? I mean, he said passionate startups are the vanguard of what we're doing, right? We want to work together, translate that into real value for patients. Now, why is it that a pharma company needs partners to do this, right? Especially given, for decades or even centuries, we've been pretty much doing things on our own, right? Well, the answer is pretty clear, right? I mean, we can't do it alone. So we recognize that there are all these players out there, nimbler, more agile players that are doing a lot of amazing things for patients, amazing things for the healthcare system. And Novartis is asking the question, how do we make sure that we meaningfully add value to these companies and vice versa, right? So the ultimate aim here is to learn from players in the ecosystem and to give what we've established as knowledge over a period of decades and centuries in scientific and medical knowledge, right? So ultimately, that's driving our digital transformation and why really, we set up the biome, a couple of years ago, and it's now in a couple of countries. So with regards to digital health, what does that actually mean? When we say we are going big on digital, what does that mean to Novartis, right? So I like to sort of position what we're interested in on the continuum of the patient journey, right? So on the left side, you have what we call access and initiation. So how many more patients can we capture and basically get that treatment and diagnosis to them sooner, right? These may be patients that do not know that they have specific conditions. They may not even think that their conditions are serious enough or warrant chronic care treatment, for example. And then you go to the second stage, which is about diagnosis, right? So how do we make sure that the right patients and expeditiously are actually going to the clinics to be diagnosed and diagnosed in a correct manner, right? So there's a lot of interesting work in that space. And clearly, all of you here would be a part of that journey as we go along, right? So the next stage will be treatment decisions, right? So once you've been diagnosed, with a disease, how do we now help the clinician or help the healthcare system to select the right treatments, right? To make sure that when we talk about hyper-personalized medications or we talk about predictive analytics, all that is employed in a way that benefits the physician and the patient, as opposed to having subjective treatments or subjective diagnosis. That's the name of the game when we're talking about treatment decisions. And then finally, you'll see a lot of this in the digital therapeutics space, which is around continuous care. So when a patient is discharged, or when a patient is asked to go on treatment for a number of months or even years, how do we make sure that we continue to monitor that condition in a safe way, right? So whether it's, yeah.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. I think that your screen is in presentation mode, and it's actually frozen. Are you advancing your slides?
Can you see it move now?
Okay, we can see it move now. Yes, we just had a couple of comments, and it seemed that the screen might be frozen.
Oh, sorry. I think it's just me dwelling on a slide for too long.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Sorry for the introduction. All right. Sorry for the interruption. Yeah, it just looked like the screen was frozen, so I'll let you continue. Please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I was dwelling on the slide. So let me move it along. So again, perhaps. Sorry. Do you? Is the screen up? Can you see it?
I can't see the screen, and we're currently on the slide that says digital health solutions are an integral component to our marketing and medical strategy across the patient journey.
Okay, I'll just do a re-screen share. Yikes.
Sometimes it trips up if you start in presentation mode, so I think it's better if you just keep it in the window and click through your slides in the current view.
Okay. Sure. So I'll just wrap up this slide, right? So I think clearly, I mean, if perhaps I'm preaching to the choir, so I'll move forward and take it beyond what digital solutions are actually mean, right? So what does it mean to us in terms of challenges within Novartis, right? So and you should be staring at a screen where it says, however, there are critical challenges to finding and working with digital partners. So basically in Novartis, we recognize that there's a huge problem that we've had for a couple of years, and a lot of it has to do with culture, right? So first and foremost, we have a plethora of digital initiatives. How do we focus and decide what is important to us, right? How do we decide as a company which digital areas do we want to focus on? And that was the reason, one of the key reasons we started the Biome. The second thing is a sub-scale engagement with the ecosystem. So you have partners out there, but how do we make sure that we're positioned to actually work with them? The third thing is mismatch onboarding processes. So a lot of large corporates will find this issue as well, which is that, yes, you want to work with startups, but what happens internally to enable that, right? How do we change these internal processes that have been there for decades or even centuries, right? Lack of alignment and evidence. So how do we gather enough evidence to warrant and create new business models that would allow these solutions to fly? Right? So whether that's reimbursement or whether that's partnerships, right? How do we gather that real world evidence that would justify the right clinical pathways for such solutions? And then, of course, lastly, I think we've had some experience in this area since we started, but when we did, we had an experience in actually scaling digital health solutions. And this is really why the Biome was created. So tangibly, what is the Biome, right? So it is a 5-step process that Novartis espouses across the board. It is also a series of offerings which we've created to support the health tech ecosystem, right? So we have things like the Digital Brain, which is a startup platform that allows us to see all the different projects and problem statements that are happening across Novartis. We have the Evidence Lab, which is a series of hospitals across the globe, where we have partners who are ready to validate, clinically validate solutions that are out there in the market. We have the Guild. The Guild is basically a SWAT team of regulatory, patient safety, and compliance and other functional experts who are there to accelerate digital projects beyond a seed or ideation stage. The ultimate goal is to get them to market. And the Data Sandbox, of course, where sometimes we're able to avail clinical trial data to key partners in order to actually run experiments towards better patient outcomes. And then, of course, we have the usual partners that we tend to work with in the ecosystem. So I'm accelerating my presentation a bit. So forgive me if it's a bit quick. Now, how many biomes are there on the planet, right? So there are about 15 in operation as we speak, right? So we're deployed across different key markets in Novartis, right? So I'm from the Singapore chapter, which represents the Asia Pacific and MEA. But of course, we have chapters in the US, in China, in Brazil, and even in Korea, right? So I'll be glad to connect some of you to my partners over in Biome Korea, who are doing some pretty interesting stuff with the HealthX Challenge that they ran earlier this year, right? And what I wanted to share here is that we have 15 hubs in order to make sure that the import and export of health tech partners is efficient, right? So if I find something in Singapore that could be exportable to the US, that's what I do tomorrow, right? Likewise, in France, you might see a company from France import it into the Asia Pacific because we see that there's demand from physicians in order to bring those solutions here. Or there is demand from a patient perspective, whereby, for example, you have diseases that are undertreated or underdiagnosed, right? So that's what we're doing all the time between these 15 hubs to say, what is scalable and how do we help these companies do that together with Novartis? So I think the logical question there is what have we actually done, right? So I'll take a recent example of remote monitoring, and this is with a company called Telat Healthcare in France, right? So basically, we found that company, and what they do is they help to enable monitoring of certain eye conditions, right? So eye conditions which Novartis basically treats today, right? And we said, well, if we're able to help patients monitor their conditions remotely and not have them visit the clinic excessively, why shouldn't we do that, right? So we ran a couple of pilots. We tested with a number of patients. And we said, given that there's clinical validity to what is happening here, how do we now scale this across more biome hubs so that it works, right? So that's where you see from steps 1, 2, and 3, we move to 4 and 5, where the question is not about does it work anymore, but what are the ingredients that we need to take this to more hospitals beyond the current region, right? And that is something which every biome chapter lead is equipped to help you to do, right? So whether you call it market access or patient access, that is precisely what every biome leader is here to support the health techs to do, right? And of course, the way in which we would measure success in some cases would be adherence, right? I mean, for obvious reasons, but also ultimately, I think the two metrics that are of biggest interest to us are, number one, accelerated diagnosis, and number two, can we increase the patient pool? So if you're a startup and you're aligned to a Novartis therapeutic area, and you're able to address one of these two metrics, everything that you see on this slide is what we want to do for you. So I think that's the key message I would like to leave with health techs on this call. So I see that we've got 4 minutes left. Allow me to go to something which might be of interest to you. So I spoke a little bit about evidence labs, right? So what are these evidence labs? They are basically a network of hospitals across the planet where we hope to enable you as our partners to actually test your solutions, right? So right now they're mainly in the US and the UK, but we're definitely keen to scale this beyond these regions, right? To the Asia Pacific, to Korea. And this is where a conversation with a hospital network or an innovation center within a hospital network would be of extreme benefit to both you and to us, as well as the hospitals themselves, right? So we're happy to start these conversations. If you are somebody working in the civil service, if you're somebody leading a hospital innovation team, please do get in touch with either my colleagues in the Biome Korea or with myself, and we'd be happy to facilitate that process. But the landing point that I would like to stress here is that we're ready to basically work with you to validate any solutions that you think can help patients. Yeah. So we've got 3 minutes. Let me share a little bit about our Biome Fellowship program, right? So I was wondering if I had time. I think I should be okay. So some early stage startups do come to us and say, well, how do we actually work with you? And what does Novartis provide in return, right? Because we don't take equity in the companies that we partner with, and we have no reason to, right? The only thing we're interested in is improved patient outcomes. And in return, we give you a co-working space, although that may be less relevant in today's age, right? But I think more crucially, we provide solution validation, right? So all those hospital networks, the clinicians that we're talking to, the networks of accelerators and incubators, which the Biome is a part of, we want to help you get access to these people, right? And that's a key value proposition. In terms of the mentors that Novartis provides, it is not just medical or clinical. We also provide regulatory expertise, patient safety, as well as innovation, right? So myself, I come from a product management background, right? And so do a lot of my peers in the Biome. So we won't just teach you how to do it scientifically. We're going to teach you how to scale your startup and make it work. And I think that's probably one of the largest value drivers for startups to work with the Biome. And then, of course, we have the Novartis Biome Network, right? So a huge network of hubs for importing and exporting your capabilities, and we want to avail that to you. The last thing, of course, is the data sandbox. So on a case-by-case basis, we will be able to avail an environment or a secured environment with anonymized data to allow you to facilitate those experiments and prove that your solution has clinical validity. So lastly, if you're interested to get on board, right, please do fill up this form. It's a QR code. It shouldn't take you more than, dare I say, 5 minutes, right? It's a needs assessment to tell us at Novartis, what are you interested to do and where do you need the greatest help, right? Following which I will match you to the relevant partner within Novartis, whether it's in Korea or beyond. I'm sure we have audiences from beyond Korea and Switzerland joining us today. So I guess I'll end here. I just want to be on the dot, but I'm looking forward to chatting on the discussion panel. Back to you, Mario.
Christian, thank you very much for your presentation. A quick notice to the audience, there is a panel on the right side of your screen that says Q&A. Please feel free to start writing your questions for the speakers as we go through the presentations, and we can cover them during the panel session. Now we've got our second speaker for today, Celia Oculi. Celia leads the Center of Excellence for Personalized Healthcare for Roche Belgium and Luxembourg, and she defines a strategy for personalized healthcare portfolio and drives partnerships, both with traditional and untraditional stakeholders in medical care. She's focused on shaping a sustainable and data-driven healthcare ecosystem. Celia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Very pleased to be here.
Right. So we just had a great presentation by Christian. I know you have a presentation on the Belgian journey toward the data-driven ecosystem. So please go ahead and share your screen, and we'll follow that with our panel discussion.
Let me share my screen and tell me if you can see it actually.
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Okay. Okay, so yes, I'm leading the Center of Excellence for Personalized Healthcare in Belgium and Luxembourg, and here I will focus the speech on the Belgian journey for Roche. So first things first, what does it mean for us, personalized healthcare? I believe we have all heard this definition of the right drug to the right patient at the right time. But today, when we are actually looking at the pace of innovation, we realize that the technology and the digitalization has enabled us to actually deliver more different type of solution. So it's the right solution to the right patient at the right time. And behind solution, it's about diagnostic, treatment, and insights. And so if we look at this in the perspective of a patient flow, we see that we are moving from a precision medicine, which is focusing on the treatment recommendation, to an entire flow, from prevention to disease management. So this is an ideal personalized flow. And here we see that we are moving, and we are really enlarging the scope of personalized healthcare, and this is mainly driven by digital health innovation. So now let's imagine that all those solutions, diagnostic generating status, health status, drug generating outcomes, and captured by digital health, or digital health, actually digital therapeutics also generating outcomes and captured. What if all those data generated could be integrated and be translated into analytics? And this having consistent patient journeys, personalized patient journeys in all disease areas. This is what we call a data-driven ecosystem. In this data-driven ecosystem, we could see patients who could really understand the impact of their behavior and also be more empowered to take action of their own health status. HCP, so a healthcare practitioner, having a more complete and integrated overview of all therapeutic options or care journey options with both probability of outcomes, but also the risk and side effect. So they could be empowered to make meaningful and informed decisions and personalized journey for their patients. For the payers, policymakers, and health authorities, they could also monitor the performance of their decision and based on real-world data and shift toward value-based healthcare and remove waste from the system via shaping different incentives and like value-based incentive and removing the waste. For the industry, it will be actually generating a lot of different use cases and business models. And for example, the Flatiron model, which is actually an EMR, so electronic medical record footprint in the US, focusing on oncology, where they are leveraging the data, the real-world evidence, into a virtual control arm for the pharmaceutical industry. So here we see that it's faster and make it more sustainable to develop innovation. So here we see that we are actually, we saw that digital health is one of the main drivers of the personalization of care. And when we think of digital health, we think about the relationship between patient and physicians and clinicians. But here we see that actually digital health is actually the driver for data-driven ecosystem, but also the impact, it goes much beyond the care efficiency, but we are moving from personalized care to populational health. So this is what I wanted to highlight, yeah. So I'm just checking. Yeah. So and we are moving from digital health, data-driven ecosystem, and data-driven ecosystem is actually fostering sustainable health and healthcare effectiveness. So what do I mean by sustainable? It means the prevention. We see that we are moving from the treatment to the overall patient journey, which includes prevention. And we believe that shifting the incentive toward prevention will make the system more sustainable with less more meaningful investment in healthcare spending. Also more inclusive for the whole population. We will have a complete overview of which patient population are not benefiting from the system, and how to create the right incentive to make it more inclusive and enable everybody, every patient and citizen to get the same level of access to qualitative care, and also value-based incentive. So rewarding what is working, what is driving good patient outcomes, and removing waste from the system. So this is the data-driven ecosystem. And here I give you 3 examples of use case of digital health solution, which are driving personalized healthcare, personalization of the care. Of course, in digital health, we have a multitude of different use cases. And also we can have a lot of hybrid solution depending on the disease itself. So here, the disease progression monitoring is really the basics. It's about the data collection, longitudinal data collection at the patient side. And it's really like the basic, and we can have Fitbit solution and also much more complex, for example, in multiple sclerosis, disease progression monitoring tools. The patient flow benchmarking is about data visualization, but requires the collection of structured and consistent data from many different flows, patient flows, for a specific indication. So it requires to have more maturity in the infrastructure, in the local infrastructure. And this patient flow benchmarking is actually the foundation for having continuous improvement for patient care flows. And the last one, clinical decision support, is about translating. I mean, we need to collect those longitudinal data in a very efficient, structured, but also evidence qualitative way to translate that into meaningful analytics to support the decision making. So we see that through those 3 examples, we have an increasing complexity in generating the insight, the information to support the care provider, but also an increasing complexity in the local ecosystem where we need to develop the solution to integrate the data. So in the previous slide, the key message was that to have a personalized care and population health, we need to strengthen the innovation of digital health. But here we see that to strengthen the innovation in digital health, we also need to have good foundation in the local ecosystem, maturity in terms of access of the data to enable the federated learning. So where do we bring our focus in Belgium? So of course, we have, so here you see that you have the 3 different use cases. Oops, you have the 3 different use cases. And I put them in the perspective of centralized, decentralized, so close to the patient, centralized at the national level, or distributed. And here we, of course, we have the Roche integrated solution portfolio made of standalone digital health product or integrated solution with a therapeutic product. And I'm not going to focus the discussion on this one because this is the portfolio of every country, every affiliate in the Roche world. But I will focus the presentation on the 2 examples we have of transformative partnership with in an untraditional approach. So the first one is clinical decision support. How can we enable clinical decision support at the centralized national level via the Geneo project? And the second one is the patient flow benchmarking with a hospital network for the Vlaams Oncology platform. So what is Geneo about? So Geneo is a public-private partnership. So we are actually partnering with all the university hospital in Belgium and more, the National Cancer Center and the Medical Society of Oncology. And we are also including other industry, pharmaceutical industry partners. And our ambition, so we started this project 2 years ago almost, and our ambition was really to embed precision medicine in routine. So there is a precision group living without pharmaceutical industry, but they were actually facing some issue in rolling out and in reshaping their environment. So we joined them, we leveraged existing infrastructure to really be challenge focused and really design a partnership focusing on showcasing the impact of a precision medicine framework. So what is a precision medicine framework? First, it answers the shifting paradigm of precision oncology. So moving from tumor-located treatment to molecular therapy. So first step is really to have tumor profiling in place for every patient. Then is to have to enable every physician to make the best recommendations. So we support them also in enabling a national molecular tumor board. Then we have, with the other pharma partner, a coalition to give access to molecular-driven therapies. And then all this framework and all the insights or data generated by this framework, like outcomes, different touch points, and so on, are all collected in a centralized clinical genomic database hosted by the National Data Bank in Belgium. So we are working on together, and it's really federated learning. We have actually our interim readout this month. So I cannot tell yet, but we are very excited to see what it will bring and the evidence we will demonstrate. And here, just to conclude, that the foundation the foundation of a precision medicine framework, so this example is really linked to oncology in an agnostic setting, is really based on this clinical genomic database. And without having a clinical genomic database here centralized at the national level, we cannot create the learning loop to further develop this clinical decision support tool. So this is a key element where industry, health authorities, medical societies are working together for maturing our how can I say, pilot of data-driven ecosystem in oncology. The second one is the Vlaams Oncology Platform, so in English, Flemish Oncology Platform, VOP. It's also a public-private partnership, and here in a decentralized approach. So we are working with hospital network, and it's not only Roche, it's also J&J, MSD, and consultancy firm. And we are working with them really to, and it's a staged approach. The first approach is really to create the infrastructure and to capture all the data in a consistent and structured way. And once this federated data platform will be in place, we will really look at all the best practices in terms of, and it follows the value-based healthcare principles to really benchmark what is a best practice, what is driving best patient outcomes, and how can we spread those best practices. They are not linked to treatments. Of course, they will be later on linked to treatments, but here is really in terms of workflow, patient journeys. And then within this setup, and with this very consistent and structured setup, we will actually also leverage this organization to integrate and assess our future digital solution. So this is also, so we are working on different approach. The first one is a centralized one, a national one, to really support health authorities and also create this learning together about why it is meaningful and why we need to have federated learning, but also in a decentralized way, because it's also how we believe that those initiatives are enabling us to shift the culture toward public-private partnership. So this is the two-side approach. So the message I would like you to take home first is personalized care journey are not only therapeutic, it's about diagnostic, therapeutic, and mostly digital solution to create optimal workflow for best patient outcomes. Digital health at scale is actually, together with federated learning, is the cornerstone of data-driven ecosystem, which is the key enabler for healthcare effectiveness and sustainability. Digital health solution development and rollout also depend on the maturity of the local ecosystem, especially in terms of infrastructure and integration. So to foster digital health, we actually need to change our traditional approach and culture of product development and shift toward public-private partnership. And those public-private partnerships are a unique opportunity to learn together and both support the materialization of the ecosystem toward data-driven decisions and the digital health innovation and attractiveness. So yes, I hope you have questions and you find this interesting. And I don't know if I made it on time or not.
We are right on time, actually, 2 minutes early, which gives us enough time to, go ahead and transition into the panel discussion. Thank you so much, Celia, for your presentation. And we do have a couple of questions that were already coming in while you were speaking. At this time, I would like to invite Edward and Christian to please also turn on your microphone and your cameras. We do have in this panel discussion the opportunity to discuss with all three speakers and to get into more depth. For the two presenters, Christian, I would like to start off with you. We had a question from the audience that I actually think is highly relevant. I'd like to address that first. It's related to communications. Then I will introduce Edward to our panel, and then we will continue with the more technical details about data, healthcare, and regulation. So Salman, thank you so much for your comment about does it look like a Novartis PR session? I actually think that is really interesting, and it's related to a discussion Christian and I had ahead of time, where I mentioned that in his background, Christian had worked with finance companies, and his academic background was in media and in communications. So the comment that I would say is, well, in my opinion, it's the good form of PR, which is what we asked everybody to do here today: clarify the role that your organization is playing within the ecosystem, and address the opportunities for collaboration, which means highlight the programs and the initiatives that you have available. So I would like to turn it over to you, Christian, if you can expand on that, and what role do social sciences, media, and communications play, in the work that you do, more than just the core medical expertise and technologies?
No, sure. Thanks, Mario, and thanks, Salman, for that question or comment as well, right? So firstly, I mean, I'm trained in a couple of things, right? I'm a graphic designer. I did journalism. I did sociology, and now I'm studying analytics, right? So why I'm telling you this is because I feel like that paradigm or that model of what a medical entrepreneur looks like, right? I think that is quickly changing, right? I'm not saying that this calls for everybody to be trained in a multitude of different things, but it's more about getting cross-functional teams together and then hashing it out, right? So I wouldn't profess to be an expert in biomolecular engineering, right? But therein, I would be able to tell you, how do we position Novartis as a company that wants to actually work with health techs? So actually, why does it sound a bit pitchy is because why would startups want to work with a pharma anyway? If you think about it, I mean, we're these large, clunky organizations that are known for bureaucratic processes in many sectors, right? So put yourselves in the shoe of a founder in Silicon Valley, right? I've just come up with this amazing technology. I'm in it for open innovation. Why would I work with a Novartis versus building it myself? Why wouldn't I partner with a Roche? Why wouldn't I partner with a Google or an Amazon to do something? And it's a huge pitch that we have to make to get through that clutter, right? So that's why I think it sounds a bit PR, right? But for good reason, right? I mean, this is in a way like a reverse pitch. So coming back to Mario's question about how do different skill sets play in today's world of pharma innovation, right? So when we talk about sociology, it is really about understanding demographics, psychographics, and how communities come to form, right? In fact, if you look in the medical literature, this has been something that is basically universal, right? Every paper you see has some comment about how do we find out what patient pain points are, right? But I think sociology adds an extra degree of finesse to that, right? Because you literally spend an academic career studying how to form communities and why do people come together in order to address pain points or even create patient advocacy groups. How many of those things are useful? How do we talk to clinicians? What is the relationship between clinicians and their patients? How much of that is effective? I mean, these are all sociological questions. I'm not saying that everybody should be trained in sociology, but it clearly gives you a nice perspective on these things as well. Right. I don't know if that answers the question or adds more confusion, but that's my take anyway, Mario.
Thanks a lot, Christian. I mean, it definitely answers the question, and I think that's right. We have a complex set of stakeholders. I would like to take this moment now to introduce our third panelist, Edward Choi. He is an assistant professor of the Graduate School of AI at KAIST, and his current research interests include machine learning, healthcare, and natural language processing. Prior to joining KAIST, Edward was a software engineer at Google Health Research, where he developed deep learning models to process electronic health records. And for his PhD in computer science, he studied interpretable deep learning models for healthcare analytics. So what I would like to do is continue that discussion and turn it over towards both Edward and Celia. which is that I think natural language and communications plays a key role in putting these ecosystems together. Celia, I don't mean to skip you, but Edward just joined, so I'd like for him to take a first crack at continuing on this thought. So, Edward, what have you seen in the area of natural language processing and electronic health records that seems to also overlap with these areas of communications and language, whether it's sociology or marketing or PR?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
All right. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Oh, I think there's a bit of a lag, but thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here. And as for the question about NLP and how its recent development or advances in NLP world is related to the current topic that we're talking about, it's I think it has multiple aspects, but since my primary interest lies in electronic health records, I'd like to kick things off in that aspect first. So electronic health records, mostly what I'm usually recently invested in is how to gather electronic health records from multiple sources or multiple sites together, and then learn, do large scale machine learning or do a large scale analytics. And it is if you contain that in a single nation, it's not a problem, because you just need to go through the privacy laws and that kind of stuff, which are all legal matters, which is, in itself a pretty huge topic. But if you can somehow overcome that, then you can gather data from multiple hospitals in a single nation where there is no language barrier at all. But if you start expanding that to multiple nations, like across the borders, then there are a lot of valuable information in multiple countries with different population groups, different characteristics, different rare diseases that occur in certain regions, certain geopolitical areas. And the language barrier kind of blocks that kind of grouping, the pulling the information from multiple places. So currently, I'm mostly working with English electronic health records because of that problem. So because English is kind of like the go-to language for all NLP researchers mostly. So it's easy to stick to one language mostly for your research. But if you want to expand that to gather electronic health records, even like open source ones, there are only like very handful number of open source electronic health records in the world. Like there's a very well known like Mimic3, EICU. Those are like the all English electronic health records which you can get for free. But there are also like Brazilian EHR, which are also open source for free, but they're all in Portuguese, obviously. And there's a Dutch electronic health records, which are also open source, but they're all in Dutch. So having a multilingual, having like an AI agent that has a multilingual understanding capability will be able to pull those information together and then create a single gigantic repository to train your machine learning model on, which is, it is well known fact that the more data you pour into a gigantic model, the performance will just keep increasing the sky is the only limit, and we haven't seen where they can take us to. The recent very popular language model called GPT-3 was trained on the entire internet on all English, and it was just writing poems, writing news articles. It was doing a chatbot. It was answering questions. It could do a lot of things. Imagine that we could do that with electronic health records from all the world, just answering questions for the patients, predicting stuff from the future, filling the holes for missing values, just get mining insights from multiple sources. That is not just a dream. It can happen. It's just that the language barrier is still there. So multilingual there. So the technology side, there are pretty advanced models like multilingual BERT. So BERT is like the go-to model for doing anything related to NLP. Like if you want to do document classification, if you want to do question answering, if you want to do like whatever, anything that is related to NLP, BERT is like the go-to model. And of course, obviously, English BERT was the thing from like couple of years ago, but now there's something called like multilingual BERT. You train a model named BERT with all the languages in the world, like all the like hundreds of languages in the world. You just pour all those languages without actually telling which language is which. You just pour them into the single model and let the model figure out how the relationship between French and German, the relationship between Chinese and Korean, the relationship between German and English, like all this is just somehow figured out by the model. So the multilingual BERT theoretically has capability to understand any language given to it. So if we can develop something called like multilingual EHR, multilingual EHR model, then you can easily just simply pour into the model multiple EHR data into the model. So it's not just a theory; it is actually possible. It's just that it's a very large scale work. Like only companies like Google or Apple or Amazon, like a very handful number of companies with a lot of resources, a lot of power, a lot of manpower, a lot of deep pocket can do that kind of large scale stuff. So unfortunately, I belong to academia, so I can't do that. I don't have enough money or manpower or the computational resources to do that. But theoretically, if any large scale company, large multinational corporate can do that, then I'd be really happy. I'd be really interested in how that pans out. So that is one aspect, the one technical challenge. Another is the data, of course. Obviously, we need a lot of data from multiple countries, and that is where the legal matter comes in. And I personally, honestly, don't see that being resolved within a couple of years. It's going to take a long time. It's not even completely hashed out within a single country yet. So if we think of multiple countries chipping in their private data to form a large-scale single repository, I kind of don't see that happening anytime soon, but something that we need to talk about in the long term. Yeah, I think I've talked enough on my part.
I think that was really interesting, and one I think common thread that I see, Christian mentioned specifically the word cluttered. There's a lot of clutter in messaging that they have to try to get across through with their message, and in some ways, what you described also shows that you need to have the right systems, specifically within electronic health records, which is your context. Otherwise, you end up with clutter as well, right? And that's a huge productivity barrier in hospitals, and it's something that your team is trying to solve. So I think that's very appropriate. And theoretically speaking, if there were a large company interested in the work that you do, such as Novartis or Roche, it would be great to have you guys together on a panel, right? To talk about these issues. Edward, you spoke about this in terms of the barriers in different languages. And I think this is a great point in which we can bring Celia into the conversation, because she works in Europe, where I'm sure, English at a professional level is not a problem, but you are working across multiple languages. Celia, I know from your background, you are a French national and you work in Belgium and Luxembourg, so major French-speaking area. Also, you work with multiple stakeholders from different areas, different professions. And my experience is, even if they speak the same national language, like English or French or Korean, they don't always seem to completely understand each other. So what would be your take on the challenges in communication across language groups in this way, but also across these different functional groups from different stakeholders in your ecosystem?
Yes, so actually in Belgium, we have 3 national languages. So it's actually a concern when it's about rolling out some solutions. But the major challenges are actually related to, and Christian, you mentioned it, to the trust. This is the very first challenge we are confronted. Then the culture, but first the willingness and how to build up the trust. We have to be very crystal clear and transparent about where do we have the consensus, what's the win-win, and what's the scope of the partnership and the ambition of the partnership. And actually learning by doing, I would say. We started this journey, actually, so I started this journey 3.5 years ago. But I really see as a very powerful driver this common ambition of having data-driven ecosystem in And I think this fear of the big bad pharma industry is actually changing. We see now that we come up with capabilities to accelerate things which are not possible in different settings, and whether it's public or startup or yeah. So and we also come with different ways of working, which might be a challenge, but it's also, I believe, very interesting and to mix those different perspectives. And it's not only us bringing value. Actually, I learned a lot every day. For example, one of the untraditional partnership you do not expect is actually a partnership with a school. So it's very, very interesting to connect with the future generation. I wouldn't say of patients, because I hope not, but of users. Digital health, as explained, is enabling us to move from sick care to healthcare. So, and really, what are the expectations? Because every time we touch the data topic, we also touch ethical topic. What society look like? How do we? And every day we bring our value in our collaboration. So so it's very, very interesting to get those perspectives. What is the ideal world, ideal healthcare system? And it's very inspiring. So yes, building the trust, and the trust doesn't come up within a month. It's but I think it's really realistic. It's very feasible, and then having a very strong common ambition and very clear ambition.
I think you just brought up a really interesting issue related to trust. And in a little while, Edward, I'll double back to that, because I think the issues of trust are also closely related to how artificial intelligence is perceived. Before we go in that direction, though, Celia, I have two audience questions that I'm going to put together into one single question from Michael Rebhan and Ayong Jung. And the question is, the presentation that you had was mostly about oncology, but does a data-driven approach also work for other chronic diseases? And can you give some examples where doing so has actually helped with prevention rather than treatment or outcomes?
So yes, Roche is an historic player in oncology, and I'm very much biased by oncology, and now we are shifting toward neurology, ophthalmology, so we can already reflect on different settings and toward more chronic and rare disease. And the data-driven ecosystem is actually even more impactful, I would say. Oncology is a clear burden, whether it's unmet clinical need or financial burden. But for rare disease, having the opportunity to leverage patient journeys, to pull patient journeys from everywhere in Europe, everywhere in the world, to really enable Center of Excellence to better treat patients, to make more informed decisions, is actually a big driver in healthcare efficiency. And same for chronic disease. Indeed, chronic disease, we recently made a report. It's one of the biggest burden financially for at least in Europe. And so yes, it applies. I think in my presentation, I put a lot of complexity regarding clinical decision support, because in oncology, the therapeutic decision is one of the most complex. It's a multifactorial, including all the omics. You have plenty different type of drugs, clinical trial, etc. So for a single brain, it's impossible to digest and remain state of the art for every patient. So this CDS is especially complex for in oncology, and might be way less complex, for example, in diabetes care, where the patient is actually empowered to take the dose himself. And we all even have in vivo sensors and so on. Regarding prevention, Christian, what are what are the examples? I'm gonna be honest, I haven't found true examples. It's an assumption at the moment. And that's why we are working in an approach towards federated learning. Because if we do not have those partnerships to generate evidence together, to align on what is working, what is not working, we will not be able to shape a consistent system to support patients. But we have this belief that prevention will help to both prevent, delay, or stop potential disease and remain. And we believe that prevention intervention are way less expensive than acute care management. And one example I can bring in two different, so out of oncology, the first one is infertility, preeclampsia. Today, when we look at the cost of treating a preeclampsia woman, so a pregnant woman, is huge, and also just the life of the mother and the baby is at risk. And by a single test in preeclampsia, we can really better stratify the patient and really make sure secure the high-risk mother in a way less expensive journey. The second example is Alzheimer's disease. Now we have the technology, diagnostic technology, to identify the disease up to 20 years before the onset of the symptoms. So imagine if we couple that with an efficient therapeutic, or not therapeutic, but because here the definition of prevention becomes really blurred, and therapeutic as well, because if you don't feel the symptoms of a disease, are you really sick? I mean, where does it start being sick? Is it the start of the biomarker? Is it the start of the symptoms? And this would be way less expensive than having the care management of Alzheimer patients, who are extremely costly for the society, but also for all the relative around. This is a real family burden, relative burden. So yes, proof of concept to be generated and innovation to be fostered.
Thanks a lot. I think that's, I hope that answers the questions that Michael and Ayong had. You touched on an important part that is, you have a couple of examples, but right before that, you also said that, theoretically we could, but we really need access to, more data. And I think that at least in Korea, what we see is that the hospital systems, the hospitals themselves are highly digitalized. But then the accessibility to those records is limited, not in terms of technology, of course, to international researchers in terms of language, if everything is in Korean, but even a bigger barrier that we're finding is regulatory access. And for that, I'd like to turn back to Christian, because I know that this is an area where Novartis is working on trying to share and develop best practices to improve the regulatory frameworks. Is there something that you can say in this topic, Christian, of the work that you've done, some best practices or opportunities for Korea that you think are worth exploring?
Sure. So Mario, let me try and take this in two fronts. So the first being what we've seen work, and the second being how are countries learning from each other. So where do we see the regulatory environment playing well with digital health? Is where they've basically started to look at emerging technologies to say, what are the modes or the criteria to which we evaluate if something is dire or if something is of less risk. For example, this area of software as a medical device, right? I mean, so I think, Clea and Edward spoke a lot about clinical decision support, right? A lot of the time, I mean, these solutions are powered by AI, right? But when you talk about medical devices in the past few decades, right? I mean, there are commonly established norms for evaluating what a medical device is. But today, if we're talking about a class 1 or class 2 software as a medical device, what does that mean, right? Do you stop at a point where you say, okay, we did not provide a diagnosis, or the solution did not provide a diagnosis, but it certainly influenced a clinician's decision towards that, right? Do we then say that is software as a medical device? Or do you say that no, it's not, right? I mean, it doesn't warrant calling it that, and that standard is something which is not universal at the moment, right? So you could see a very different standard in India versus something that is happening in Korea or Singapore, right? And they're all moving at different speeds, right? So where we've actually seen interesting partnerships is regulators learning from startups, right? So I'm not sure if I'm actually able to list the names of companies and regulators, but I know for a fact that in a number of countries, regulators have created policies based on the trajectories of startups. So they actually said, okay, let's set up a sandbox, and we're going to do something in software as a medical device or telemedicine or what have you. And we're going to put the top 3 partners in this pool to see how they scale up. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to see what they say, and we're going to do an advisory committee to find out, right? And the result of that was actually a set of policies that now enable future startups to get involved and do that, right? So where have I seen this, right? I mean, Singapore is obviously pretty forward in that area. And in fact, recently there were a set of software as a medical guidelines that came out for the HSA, if I'm not wrong, the Health Sciences Authority. Elsewhere on the planet, obviously Germany is very ahead in this, right? I think they got started in this journey maybe even a year ago or 2 years ago, and everybody was excited about that. So a lot of countries are learning from each other to do that. And where Novartis is interested to play a part, right, is really in sharing what we've learned, right? So I think just now it was either Celia or Edward, you might have mentioned digital therapeutics, right? So one big challenge there is finding a business model that works for the clinician, right? So we've run pilots in remote monitoring where the clinician actually says, oh, this all sounds great, but it's too much work, right? Why would my clinic want to onboard a remote monitoring solution only to spend more time and expending my nurses' energy to look at a diagnostics dashboard, right? And we say, well, wait, I mean, it's clear that this helps patients, so why wouldn't you do it, right? So ultimately, a lot of these conversations come down to an economic question of, can I fund the solution, right? So do pharmas think that we can play a part? I think so, right? I mean, because if you actually prove a pilot and you're able to gather that evidence, you can push for things like reimbursement, right? So I think an example that I see in Australia, which is amazing, is that I think sometime, I mean, don't quote me on this, but recently they actually looked at enabling reimbursing health screening at the GP level for heart failure or other forms of cardiovascular disease, right? So as a patient, instead of paying $150 for a health screening for cardiovascular disease, you're paying 20 Australian dollars to get that, right? And what does that mean? It means that if you were to introduce a screening device at the clinic level, the patient is able to move through the diagnosis funnel much quicker, right? So on the one hand, you prevent false positives. On the other hand, you're taking the patients that do need that level of secondary care and you're pushing them forward in the funnel, right? So, I mean, I don't know if I'm adding more complexity to the question, but I feel like these are ways forward, and I've seen that in our projects and what we're trying to do, and I suspect for Edward and Celia as well, probably the same learnings as in their areas.
Thanks, Christian. And I think it's fine to add complexity to the question, because part of this symposium is to bring this conversation together, where all of us are, whether or not we mention it, all of us are facing this complexity in our everyday work. And the idea is try to find a way to, systematize it, to wrangle it, and to make sure that we are staying sufficiently productive. So, Edward, we had a question that I know that you already addressed about generating synthetic data, and as a follow-up to that is, can your research potentially contribute the shift to more prevention? It'd be great if you can address that question directly for Michael, and if I can add a dimension to that, which is not just shifting towards prevention, but also to helping, communication across these, different issues that we face in providing evidence to regulators and other stakeholders as well.
Yeah, that's a complex question. So I'm going to address the first one which is, can my research potentially contribute to the shift to more prevention? Rather than, I guess there's a hidden statement that more prevention rather than diagnosing at the last minute. So only in theory, yes, of course, because what I've been doing so far is to predict the future onset of something like, critical, like a high mortality, high resource consumption diseases like heart failure or COPD, that kind of stuff, which is if you diagnose it at the last minute, it's virtually useless because all you can do is just make the pain go away. So in theory, yes, but the problem is that the research that I've done so far only utilizes the electronic health records and EHR only. And EHR are a very low resolution information, so because it only is generated, they're only generated when the patient visits the hospital, and that is the only time relevant information is generated. And in order to prevent something, in order to catch a subtle signal, as addressed by Michael, like express in language or express in some other way, like blood pressure or whatever the patient or the subject generates in many different ways, in order to catch a subtle signal to foretell that if you behave this way, something bad will happen to you in a year or two. If you're going to do that, you need a lot more information than just EHR. I need your daily diet, your frequently visited places, your your chats with your friends. Like in Korea, everybody uses KakaoTalk. So your KakaoTalk records, your Gmail threads, I need all of that in order to exactly know what you're doing and how you're living your lifestyle, so that I can say, if you don't go to the gym, you're going to get fat, and then, you're going to get all kinds of disease. Or if you frequently go to McDonald's, it's not going to be good for you. Like that kind of thing, that kind of resolution is required to really prevent something from happening. And that ties back to the privacy issue, because in order to really help people with prevention, I need more data from you. So that means more compromise to the privacy. So if you are willing to sacrifice your privacy, I can help you. But if not, I cannot help you. So there is a trade-off between the two. And I think that would be a very interesting discussion to have as a community as a whole, because it's not a one-person decision. So that is one. And communicating with about the evidence, trying to explain my. So when you said evidence, I'm going to assume that the evidence for making decisions, like if you're doing clinical decision support, I need evidence, or I need to explain away why some model made this choices, like such choices or such decisions, and then try to explain that to the people who have conflicts of interest, like doctors and the hospital and the patients and the insurance companies. So in order to do that, then the language is another thing that comes in. So because people with different backgrounds have different knowledge, and they require different level of explanation. So currently the language NLP techniques are not there yet. So it's the same phenomenon. Like I make a prediction for something. Given a patient record, or like several decades of patient record, I make a prediction that you're going to have heart failure within a year or two. And then there is a very complex decision-making process done by the AI model. And in order to hash that out and then provide that as an evidence, to like convincing evidence to different level of expertise to patients, I'm going to have to speak in normal day-to-day language. To doctors, I'm going to have to use some medical expert, domain specific terms. If I'm going to speak to insurance companies, they will probably be interested in some other aspects, like something more financially influencing aspects or terms. So explaining the same phenomenon in multiple different aspects, different levels of expertise, that is something very important in real life, but not really researched in NLP world, because it's a very, I would say, very application specific. It's like people in machine learning or AI, they would like to tackle like general problems that can be useful in all kinds of scenarios. But the challenge that I address right now, which is explaining the phenomenon in multiple different aspects, multiple different expertise, that is a bit more application specific. I think it can generate a lot of revenue. It's just that research wise, it may not be as appealing as building a general chatbot or building agent that can answer any question that you ask. That is a bit more appealing academically. So there's a bit of a interest gap or interest disparity between what the industry requires and what the researchers are interested in. So that's probably something that I don't think that will go away anytime soon. It's just that we need a common platform where industry people and research people can communicate very frequently, very often. So that becomes like that idea like flows naturally to the academia, and then obviously has to go back and forth. So yeah,
right.
That's my take on the issue.
Thanks. We have 1 minute left, and Ala asked me to have one last question. I actually have a super quick question for all three of you, so I would really greatly appreciate a Twitter length answer, and then we'll move back to the stage because it's relevant to what Edward was just talking about. And Edward, you work with electronic health records, but you just mentioned the applicability of these technologies to other areas. So not just Novartis or Roche, but other startups. If there's a startup working within this space where they think that what you are doing is relevant, is it possible to interact with your lab, whether sponsoring a project or hiring some resources from your lab for this type of work? Is that something that's possible?
Absolutely. It's something that I would welcome very much. I'm always looking for challenging, real world opportunity, because what I do is more like application oriented. So if I don't reflect on what's happening in the real world, then the research is useless. So obviously, sponsoring, recruiting, all types of engagement is always welcome. So please do. My lab is always open. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. Christian, quick question for you. Do you work only with formal healthcare, or do you also interact with consumer health, such as meal planning startups or exercise or wellness and meditation? Do you also welcome those type of startups into Biome?
No, absolutely. As long as there is a link with a therapeutic area that we're pursuing, and I'd be happy to have that conversation, whether it's in cardiovascular or ophthalmology, and other areas, or neuroscience. Let's have that conversation. Happy to pursue.
Okay, Ale is calling us back out into the main stage. Just 30 seconds, Ale. And just finally for Celia, in terms of, are there any kind of specific requests that you have right now in terms of the type of data companies that you'd like to work with?
I think there is a lot of opportunities as Hosh is heavily investing inside business. So we have a new organization building up. So we will have under the same roof, Pharma, Dia, and Insight. So that's the moment for every startup to showcase and partner with Hosh. Yes, indeed.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we'll definitely, for our audience, collect a little bit more information on these opportunities that we just mentioned, and we'll distribute it for follow-up. With that said, our session on digital health comes to a close. Thank you so much, Christian, Celia, and Edward. And please, everybody, let's move back to the main stage. Click on the stage icon on the left of your screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mario.
Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you found the presentations and discussion of interest and that they could inspire some ideas fostering cooperation between Switzerland and Korea in the healthcare sector. I'd like to thank the sponsor who make this bilateral cooperation possible, the Korean Ministry of Health and Welfare, the State Secretariat for Education, Research and Innovation, the Korean branches of Novartis and Roche. Also, I'd like to thank Kidis and my team for the coordination and development of the Life Science Symposium in remote. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for your interest and participation. Looking forward to meeting you in person, hopefully for the 2022 edition.